Hey guys, today we're pulling back the curtain on the ultimate cosmic mystery, the one that's kept humanity peering into the void for millennia, the very idea of hell. Imagine you're huddled by a flickering fire, the only light against an inky, primeval night. Outside, the wind howls like a hungry beast, rustling through the ancient trees, and every shadow seems to writhe with unseen things. You can almost feel the chills seeping into your bones, not just from the cold, but from the raw, untamed wilderness pressing in. A wilderness where life is fleeting and death is a constant, looming companion. One minute your favorite hunting buddy, Big Thag, is sharing a laugh, the next he's gone. Just gone. His body is still there, but the spark, the essence, the Thagness of Thag, vanished. Where did it go? Did it simply cease? Or did it embark on some unseen journey beyond the comprehension of your simple, yet profoundly curious mind? It's a thought that wraps around your brain like a cold, damp vine, doesn't it? You probably won't survive this journey of discovery with your comfortable notions of the afterlife entirely intact. But that's half the fun, isn't it? So, snuggle in, because we're about to trudge through the deep, muddy tracks of our ancestors' minds, right back to where the very first inklings of a post-mortem existence began, born not from divine revelation, but from the most primal, gut-wrenching human fear imaginable. You see, long before written language, before organized religions, even before anybody had invented a wheel that didn't immediately fall off, humans were burying their dead. You can picture it. A group of stoic, grimy figures, perhaps a clan of Neanderthals, carefully placing a deceased loved one in a shallow grave. Sometimes they'd tuck in a few flint tools or a deer antler, maybe even a sprig of wildflowers, evidence. Historians still argue whether these early grave goods indicated a belief in a literal journey or merely symbolic offerings to ease grief. But whatever the reason, it speaks volumes about a nascent awareness, a stirring in the ancient human psyche that death wasn't just an ending. There was something beyond. This wasn't some intellectual exercise, mind you. This was raw, visceral fear. Fear of decay, fear of obliteration, fear that the spark of life that animated them, the one that allowed them to feel the warmth of the sun and the gnawing ache of hunger, could simply wink out. Forever. It's a thought that, even today, makes your modern, digitally enhanced brain seize up. Back then, it was a daily terror. Imagine yourself as one of these early humans, navigating a world filled with saber-toothed tigers and unpredictable weather. Life was a constant struggle for survival, a fragile dance on the edge of oblivion. When a member of your small tribe died, it wasn't just a loss. It was a cosmic anomaly. Their body was here, cold and still, but where was they? Where had their breath gone? Their consciousness. This intense curiosity, coupled with the profound sense of loss and the sheer mystery of it all, led to some truly fascinating theories. You'd watch the steam rise from a hot spring, dissipate into the air, and wonder if that's what happened to the spirit. You'd see a reflection in a still pool and perhaps, for a fleeting moment, believe it was the shadowy essence of someone long gone, peeking back at you. This primordial fear gave birth to the concept of a spirit or soul, a part of you that wasn't bound by the limitations of your perishable flesh. It was a terrifying, yet oddly comforting idea. Terrifying because it meant you weren't truly gone, but perhaps lingered, observing, even interacting. Comforting because it defied the terrifying finality of death. This is where the mainstream historical fact of animism comes in. Long before any grand temples or holy books, humans widely believed that everything rocks, rivers, trees, animals, and even the wind possessed a spirit. And if nature had spirits, why not humans? When someone died, their spirit didn't just vanish. It transformed, perhaps lingered, or journeyed to a spirit world. This wasn't a punishment or reward system yet. It was simply elsewhere. A hazy, often gloomy, spectral realm, sometimes imagined as an underground cave system, sometimes as a distant island, always beyond reach, yet tantalizingly close. You might even have tried to communicate with these departed spirits, leaving offerings, performing strange rituals. Think of it as the original customer service hotline, except instead of waiting on hold, you were hoping a ritual dance would get you past the spirit world's automated menu. And if it didn't, well, that's just bad reception, right? Now, for a quirky tidbit. Some very early burial sites, particularly in regions of Siberia, show evidence of deliberately dismembered or defleshed remains being reinterred. This wasn't cannibalism in most cases, but rather an elaborate, almost ritualistic way of dealing with the dead. Why? Scholars speculate it might have been an attempt to release the spirit from the body, or perhaps to prevent a malevolent spirit from returning to haunt the living. Imagine the meticulous, almost obsessive effort involved in ensuring Uncle Grog's spirit really didn't hang around your campfire uninvited. You had enough problems with hungry wolves without also worrying about a ghostly Grog hogging the best cuts of mammoth. It was an early form of ghost-proofing your ancestral real estate, ensuring the departed knew their lease was up in this realm. The fear, then, wasn't just of death itself, but of what came after. Was the spirit world a continuation of the harsh, earthly existence? Would there be hunger there? Cold? Predators? Or would it be a place of eternal twilight, a pale reflection of life where you wandered aimlessly, a phantom among phantoms? This apprehension, this profound unease about the unknown fate of the departed, began to lay the psychological groundwork for something far more complex. The idea that the afterlife wasn't just a neutral transition, but a destination potentially fraught with peril, a place where consequences for actions taken in life might finally catch up with you. You're beginning to feel that primordial dread now, aren't you? That shiver down your spine as you imagine stepping off the cliff of life into an utterly unmapped, potentially terrifying darkness. You're walking now, but it's less a purposeful stride and more a slow, weary shuffle. The air is thick, not with fog or the tangible humidity of a summer's day, but with something far more pervasive: dust. It's an ancient dust, fine as flour, yet impossibly heavy, clinging to the invisible shroud that now replaces your skin, settling on a tongue that can no longer taste. This isn't the dust you casually sweep from under your couch, mind you. This is the accumulated, pulverized detritus of every single breath ever exhaled in Sumer. Every whispered secret, every forgotten dream, all now pulverized and suspended here, in what the Sumerians so charmingly called the land of no return. And let's be utterly frank, given the distinct lack of breathable oxygen and the overall vibe of eternal sameness, you probably won't survive this particular historical field trip. But hey, look on the bright side. At least you won't have to deal with any more spam calls. You've just drifted through the final of the 7 great gates, each one a toll booth of existential dread, inexorably stripping away another piece of your former self. A piece of clothing, a favorite trinket, a cherished memory, all left behind, like a forgotten item at airport security. As if the cosmic bouncers here enforce the strictest, most minimalist dress code imaginable for the eternally departed. This is Kiggle, the Sumerian underworld, a destination where the only VIP access is for the truly, utterly, and irrevocably deceased. You are now a Giddim, a shade, a faint, almost translucent echo of the vibrant person you once were. Perhaps just enough of you left to quietly regret that last argument you had over who left the milk out. And here's where things get gritty. Forget the fiery furnaces of later hells, the lakes of brimstone, or the eternal ice of other cold storage afterlives. Here, the main attraction is, ironically, quite dry: dust. Yes, the dead subsist on dust. It's the ultimate low-carb, high-fiber, no-flavor diet, and it's served buffet-style endlessly. One can almost hear the Sumerian marketing slogan, Kiggle, come for the eternal quiet, stay because you literally can't leave and all the snacks are dirt. You try, for a moment, to conjure the texture, the gritty blandness, the sensation of perpetually chewing on pulverized history, a flavor profile best described as ancient attic floor. It certainly puts those trendy dust baths on TikTok into perspective, doesn't it? Presiding over this delightful destination is Ereshkigal, queen of the great earth, the dark lady of the underworld. She isn't exactly throwing welcome parties or offering loyalty points. Her domain is one of stark, uncompromising finality. Her more famous sister, Inanna, known to the Akkadians as Ishtar, the goddess of love, war, and general fabulousness, once famously decided to pay Kiggle a visit. It was less a polite social call and more a celebrity tour that went spectacularly, existentially wrong, leading to Inanna being stripped naked at each successive gate and eventually rescued only after some very intense divine bargaining. This dramatic descent of Inanna, chronicled in one of the most mainstream and compelling historical texts, the Epic of Gilgamesh, gives us one of our clearest, if most somber, pictures of this shadowy realm. It's less a place of active, fiery punishment and more a place of inevitable decay, a stark, universal truth laid bare. There's no escaping the dust, no matter how famous you are. Historians still argue whether the common Sumerian truly believed in the exact specifics of this dusty diet, that literal dust was consumed, or if it was more metaphorical, a profound literary device crafted to emphasize the crushing finality and bleakness of death. Was it a literal culinary experience in the afterlife, or simply a poetic way of saying, your earthly pleasures are gone, and you're just there, eternally unfulfilled? The truth, like much of ancient belief, likely lies somewhere in the nuanced interplay of literal interpretation and symbolic understanding. Here's a peculiar, almost whimsical fringe tidbit. Sometimes the dead were buried with reeds or pipes, believed to allow them to breathe or even communicate with the living. Imagine trying to explain that on your customs declaration form for the afterlife. Purpose of visit, eternal slumber. Items declared, one very dusty soul, one reed for minimal afterlife ventilation. It's almost charming in its pragmatism, isn't it? As if you could game the system of eternal nothingness with a simple, hollow stalk. A desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of connection, or perhaps just to avoid completely choking on all that dust. The Sumerian concept of the afterlife is strikingly different from many later, more complex hells. There's no grand judgment, no moral calculus performed on your earthly deeds. Good or evil, rich or poor, king or peasant, everyone ends up in the same dusty, monotonous, eternal holding pattern. It's an egalitarian kind of misery, you might say, where everyone gets an equal share of blandness. The only real variable was perhaps how well your living relatives remembered you, offering precious libations through those aforementioned pipes. A tiny, hopeful sip of fresh water in an otherwise arid ocean of despair. Without those offerings, you risked becoming a restless ghost, and Udaku, condemned to wander the living world, which, let's be honest, would probably be even worse than the dust diet. Imagine finally escaping the underworld, only to find you still have to deal with endless queues and buffering videos. No thanks. The Sumerians, you see, were profoundly practical people. Their gods were undeniably powerful but often capricious, and their worldview reflected the harsh, unpredictable realities of life in Mesopotamia. The sudden, devastating floods, the constant threat of invasion, the sheer daily struggle for survival. Their afterlife wasn't a place for moral retribution or divine justice. It was simply the next logical, inevitable step in the cycle of existence. From dust you came, to dust you shall return, and on dust you shall subsist. It's almost brutally honest, isn't it? No grand promises of reward or terrifying threats of inferno, just a quiet, endless fade to gray, a gentle whisper into oblivion. You can almost feel the air growing heavier now, thick with the weight of forgotten names, of countless stories unwritten, of a million lives reduced to a perpetual, barely audible sigh. The silence here isn't peaceful. It's the profound silence of absolute finality, broken only by the imagined rustle of feathered cloaks and the soft, dry whisper of a million souls nibbling on their eternal, unappetizing rations. This is where the ancient human fear truly begins to coalesce, not as a scream of terror, but as a chilling, inescapable resignation. You've left the monochromatic misery of the Sumerian underworld far behind. The dusty, echoing halls of the land of no return now just a faded memory on the wind, replaced by something altogether more vibrant, more terrifyingly beautiful, and undeniably Egyptian. Here, the afterlife isn't merely a gray descent into an eternal twilight. It's an intricate, perilous journey, a labyrinth of trials and divine encounters, each step meticulously detailed in papyri you probably didn't bother to read while you were alive. The very air here hums with ancient magic, fragrant with the ghost of incense and the distant murmur of spells. This isn't just a destination, it's an active, dangerous pilgrimage. And just a little heads up before we delve deeper into this rather specific form of post-mortem reality. Statistically speaking, navigating the Jewett, the Egyptian underworld, was less like a gentle current and more like a whitewater rafting trip through a gauntlet of mythical beasts and divine judgment. In short, you probably won't survive this journey unscathed. No refunds, no redos. But fear not, or at least, try to keep your spectral knees from knocking too loudly, because now you stand at the threshold of the ultimate reckoning, where your very essence, your heart, will determine your eternal fate. This isn't some abstract, vague notion of judgment. Oh no, the Egyptians, ever the masters of elaborate ritual and meticulous planning, had it all mapped out with exquisite, almost bureaucratic precision. You've successfully navigated the treacherous waterways, avoided the soul-leading demons that lurk in shadowy corners. Think of them as the afterlife's equivalent of perpetually disgruntled customs officers. And now, you stand in the Hall of Two Truths. This immense chamber, unlike anything you've ever witnessed, is bathed in a soft, ethereal light that seems to emanate from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The air shimmers with anticipation, a heavy, silent weight that presses down on your incorporeal form, suggesting immense, ancient power is about to be wielded. Before you, a golden scale gleams, its balance delicate, almost impossibly so, waiting for the weight of your entire existence to be measured. To one side of the scale, you see Anubis, the jackal-headed god, master of embalming and guardian of the necropolis, his dark eyes fixed on you with an unnervingly calm intensity. his posture radiating an ancient authority. He's here to officiate this most crucial of ceremonies, ensuring everything is done by the book, which, frankly, is a very, very long book. On the other side, an ibis-headed figure, Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, and magic, stands poised with his scribe's palette, ready to record every outcome, every whisper of truth, every damning detail. You get the distinct impression he doesn't miss a thing, probably even your innermost thoughts about that questionable casserole at last week's potluck. And then, at the base of the scales, a creature of nightmares given form. Amit, the devourer of the dead, her body a monstrous composite of a crocodile, a lion, and a hippopotamus, her gaping maw perpetually ready to consume the souls deemed unworthy. Her presence alone is enough to send a shiver down your incorporeal spine, making you suddenly regret that last bit of ill-advised gossip you spread in life. Or perhaps that time you, accidentally, took 2 samples at the grocery store. This is the famous weighing of the heart, the central tenet of Egyptian afterlife belief, a mainstream historical fact that resonates even today. Your heart, which Egyptians believed was the seat of intelligence, memory, and emotion, not your brain, which they unceremoniously scooped out during mummification like an unwanted melon pulp, considering it largely useless, is carefully placed on one pan of the scales. This isn't just a physical organ, it's your spiritual ledger, bearing the invisible marks of every good deed, every selfish act, every whispered secret. On the other pan rests a single perfect feather, the feather of Maat, goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. This feather represents the ideal of perfect balance and righteousness that you were expected to maintain throughout your earthly life. The stakes are, quite literally, eternal. If your heart is lighter than the feather, you've led a life in harmony with Maat, and you're granted passage into the blessed fields of Aru, a paradise of endless harvest and eternal sunshine. Think of it as the ultimate retirement plan, complete with all-you-can-eat spiritual buffets and no more annoying pharaohs. But if your heart is heavy with wrongdoing, burdened by deceit, cruelty, or simply not having paid your taxes to the temple, and yes, they definitely had taxes even then, it will tip the scales against you. And that's when Amit gets her dinner. The thought is rather sobering, isn't it? Imagine a being whose sole purpose is to obliterate your very existence, to condemn you to the absolute annihilation of the second death, a state of non-being far more terrifying than any dusty underworld. This wasn't just a simple pass-or-fail exam. It was a deeply personal reflection of your actions, your intentions, your moral compass, held up against a divine standard. Now, for a quirky tidbit that demonstrates just how seriously they took this. To help ensure your heart didn't betray you on the scales, many Egyptians had a special heart scarab amulet placed on their mummified chest. This little beetle-shaped charm was often inscribed with a specific spell from the Book of the Dead, Chapter 30b. If you're taking notes, though really, why would you be? The spell was an appeal to the heart itself, essentially saying, "Hey, heart, don't rat me out in front of the gods. Don't bear false witness against me for anything I have done." It's like having a tiny, magical lawyer strapped to your chest, whispering sweet nothings to your most vital organ right before the ultimate trial, hoping it won't blurt out all your secrets. You gotta admire their ingenuity. They thought of everything, even bribing their own internal organs. The preparation for this moment began long before your actual demise. The Book of the Dead, that vast compendium of spells, prayers, and magical incantations, was essentially an ancient Egyptian travel guide to the afterlife, complete with cheat codes for avoiding pitfalls and passing divine pop quizzes. You'd memorize negative confessions, declarations of innocence against a litany of sins. I have not stolen, I have not killed, I have not gossiped about my neighbor's dubious fashion choices, I have not caused pain, I have not polluted the water. It was less about confessing sins and more about loudly protesting your innocence, a sort of preemptive spiritual filibuster, hoping to preemptively convince the divine judges. Historians still argue whether these elaborate spells were truly effective as a magical shield against divine judgment, or if they primarily served as a psychological comfort for the living, a ritualistic assurance that their beloved deceased had the best possible chance in the treacherous afterlife. Was it genuine magic, or a profound form of therapy? The answer, like so much of the past, remains tantalizingly out of reach. And as you stand there, watching your own spectral heart quivering on the balance, the silence in the Hall of Two Truths is deafening. The only sound is the almost imperceptible thump of your heart on the pan, the gentle rustle of Mayat's feather on the other, and the low, guttural growl that occasionally rumbles from Amit, a sound that vibrates through your very core, a primal reminder of the ultimate consequence. This isn't just about escaping an unpleasant underworld, like that gloomy Sumerian one. This is about achieving eternal bliss or facing absolute annihilation. No pressure, though, right? Just your entire existence hanging in the balance. A cosmic game show where the grand prize is paradise, and the booby prize is being eaten by a terrifying chimera. It makes your most stressful job interview look like a casual chat over coffee, or that time you had to assemble IKEA furniture without instructions. The tension is palpable, thicker than the embalming resins used on your physical body, and you can only hold your breath, or what passes for it now, as the scales slowly, agonizingly begin to settle. You step from the warm, sun-drenched sands of the Jewett, leaving behind the precise scales and the hungry maw of Amit, only to find yourself plunging into a gloom so profound, so utterly without light, that your eyes, accustomed to the faintest shimmer, simply give up. The air itself feels heavy here, thick with forgotten sighs and the faint, metallic tang of regret. You shiver, but not from cold. It's the chill of absolute finality that seeps into your bones. This isn't the carefully catalogued afterlife you just left, nor the dusty, one-size-fits-all nothingness of Mesopotamia. This is Greece, and its underworld is, well, complicated. And frankly, you probably wouldn't survive a single day down here, let alone eternity, without some serious divine intervention, or at least a very good map. You stand, or perhaps float, in an ill-defined space that feels like the waiting room of an incredibly inefficient DMV for the deceased. Around you, dim, spectral figures drift, their faces indistinct, their voices a mournful hum that barely registers. This is the realm of Hades, named after its brooding, reluctant king, a fellow who got the short end of the stick in the sibling lottery, inheriting the underworld while Zeus snagged the sky and Poseidon the sea. Poor Hades. Imagine having to spend all eternity with the most depressing real estate portfolio in the cosmos. His only real claim to fame, aside from that very fetching helmet of invisibility, is his abduction of Persephone, which, let's be honest, is a bit of a low bar for a god. Unlike the fairly straightforward judgment system of the Egyptians, where your heart went on a scale trip, the Greeks started to parcel out their dead with a bit more specificity. Most souls, the vast majority of regular Joes and Janes who lived decent but unspectacular lives, found themselves wandering the asphodel meadows. Think of it as the ultimate gray area. Not quite punishment, not quite reward. Just endless, monotonous wandering amidst withered flowers, munching on a diet of bland, tasteless gruel. It's the kind of purgatory that makes you realize even a bad day at the office has more excitement. You're not being tortured per se, but you're not exactly living it up either. It's like being stuck in an elevator music loop for all eternity, only instead of Girl from Ipanema, it's just the sound of distant, echoing sighs. Then there were the VIP sections. For the truly virtuous, the heroes, and those favored by the gods, there was Elysium. This was the Greek equivalent of a five-star resort, complete with eternal springtime, lush greenery, and endless feasting. It was reserved for the exceptionally good or exceptionally well-connected. You know, the kind of place where Achilles finally gets to chill out without worrying about his heel. Historians still argue whether the concept of Elysium developed concurrently with Tartarus as a counterpoint, or if it was a later theological refinement to offer a more appealing afterlife for the heroic elite, rather than just a blanket realm for all. But now you feel a subtle shift in the oppressive atmosphere. The gloom deepens, and a low, guttural rumble vibrates through the very fabric of this non-place. This is where the real fun begins, the part that probably gave ancient Greek children nightmares, and frankly, still gives modern adults pause. This is Tartarus, not just a place in Hades, but often described as a distinct, even deeper abyss, a primordial pit that existed even before the Olympian gods wrestled control from their predecessors. It's the kind of place you'd send your in-laws if you really wanted to make a point. Tartarus was the prison of choice for the oldest, most powerful, and often most rebellious beings in Greek mythology. Its most famous residents, the Titans. Remember those massive, primordial deities who ruled the cosmos before Zeus and his siblings threw a celestial coup? Well, after a decade-long cosmic battle known as the Titanomachy, basically the biggest family feud in history, Zeus, with the help of the Cyclopes and the Hecaton chairs. Don't worry about remembering them. Just know they had lots of hands and were generally unpleasant, managed to overthrow his father Cronus and the other Titans. And where did the vanquished go? Straight to Tartarus. Imagine this. A bottomless chasm surrounded by a wall of bronze with gates of iron forged by Poseidon himself. It's guarded by the Hecaton chairs, those 100-handed, 50-headed giants who apparently missed their calling as bouncers at the universe's most exclusive club. Here, the Titans were chained eternally. It's not just a dungeon. It's a cosmic maximum security penitentiary. This concept, the idea of an explicit, eternal prison for the wicked, especially those who dared to challenge divine authority, is a mainstream historical fact that profoundly shaped subsequent Western ideas of damnation. It's where the very notion of eternal torment truly began to solidify beyond just a dreary existence. And it wasn't just for Titans, either. Over time, Tartarus became the destination for particularly egregious mortal sinners, those who committed crimes against the gods or against humanity in an exceptionally heinous manner. Think Tantalus, forever reaching for food and water that recedes from his grasp, his eternal hunger and thirst a cruel joke. Or Sisyphus, cursed to push a boulder uphill, only for it to roll back down just as he nears the top for all eternity. His punishment is not just the physical labor, but the endless futility, the constant dashed hope. A quirky tidbit. Some accounts say Sisyphus was not only condemned for defying Zeus, but also for revealing divine secrets, making him a sort of ancient whistleblower who really paid the price. So, while the Mesopotamians had their dusty land of no return, and the Egyptians their nuanced judgment, the Greeks introduced a stark dichotomy. The blissful fields of Elysium for the truly good, and the terrifying, inescapable depths of Tartarus for those who incurred the wrath of the heavens. It laid the groundwork for a theological framework that would later influence everything from Roman concepts of the afterlife to early Christian ideas of hell. The idea that your actions in life, particularly defiance against higher powers, could lead to a specific, eternal, and often creatively unpleasant punishment. Well, that's a legacy that sticks. Persian dualism, righteousness rewarded. You've trudged through the dusty Mesopotamian plains, felt the chill of the Egyptian judgment hall, and glimpsed the shadowy depths of Greek Hades. Each offered a fleeting whisper of what might come next, but your fate was largely sealed by divine decree or ritual. Now, you step onto a vast, sun-drenched plateau where the very air hums with a radical idea. That you, with every decision, every thought, are actively sculpting your eternal destiny. Imagine the crisp, thin air of ancient Persia. The scent of wild thyme drifts, and colossal, sun-baked mountains loom. Here, a revolutionary concept took root, rippling through millennia, touching how humanity conceived of good and evil. This is where you encounter Zoroastrianism, a faith so ancient and profoundly influential, its echoes heard in traditions far younger. It posits a cosmic battle, not just out there among the stars, but right here, within your own heart and mind. At its core, Zoroastrianism is a dualistic dance between two primordial forces. Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, light, truth, creativity, and Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit, darkness, falsehood, chaos. These aren't just abstract concepts, they're active players in an eternal struggle. And here's the kicker. You're not merely an unwitting bystander. Every action, word, thought, tilts the scales. You are, in essence, a tiny, crucial soldier in this grand cosmic war. Good luck with that, by the way. Most of us struggle to pick out matching socks in the morning, let alone achieve cosmic purity. It truly redefines no pressure. This isn't about appeasing capricious gods or navigating complex rituals. This is about choice. It's about good thoughts, good words, good deeds, or humata hukta h varshta. Simple, right? Like a kindergarten mantra. But imagine living your entire life under that ethical microscope. Every moment, every decision, every internal monologue, it all counts. If you've ever agonized over returning a shopping cart, imagine that moral weight multiplied. No cutting in line, no ignoring pleas, no sneaky sips. Every transgression, every kindness is tallied. It's like a cosmic loyalty program, but the rewards are eternal paradise or unpleasant eternity. The weight of personal responsibility here is immense, a direct contrast to fatalistic or ritual-bound afterlives. Your will determines your fate, not just the quality of your embalming. The Zoroastrian afterlife isn't a single destination. It's a consequence. After death, your soul journeys to the Chinvat Bridge or Bridge of the Requitter. This isn't your average sturdy bridge. It's a spiritual lie detector test combined with a tightrope walk over an abyss. For the righteous, whose good deeds outweighed bad, the bridge broadens, leading to the house of song, a realm of perpetual light, joy, and harmonious celestial companionship. It's the ultimate five-star resort, with all-inclusive happiness and absolutely no sand in your bathers. Imagine the most serene melody playing endlessly, bathing you in pure bliss. But what if your moral ledger is less than stellar? If you've been more Angra Mainyu than Ahura Mazda? For those whose wickedness tips the scales, the Chinvat Bridge narrows to a razor-thin edge, impossible to traverse. You tumble into the house of darkness, a place of gloom, stench, and miserable company, surrounded by a chilling absence of everything good. It's not fiery torment in the brimstone and pitchfork sense, lacking the screams of Greek myths. Instead, it's profound spiritual desolation, a suffocating vacuum of joy and truth. Think less medieval torture chamber, more perpetually unlit, poorly ventilated basement with only the deafening silence of your own regret. Oh, and no Wi-Fi. Now that's suffering. The sheer loneliness, the confrontation with unfulfilled potential, is the true punishment. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Zoroastrianism is one of the world's oldest continuously practiced religions, its origins tracing to prophet Zarathustra, Zoroaster, between 1500 and 1000 BCE, though historians still argue the exact timeline. This makes it a contemporary or even precursor to early philosophical movements grappling with morality and cosmic order. Its influence on later monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, is intensely debated, with many scholars seeing direct lines for concepts like heaven and hell, angels and demons, a final judgment, and a messiah figure. All find surprising parallels within Zoroastrian thought. And for a quirky tidbit, Zoroastrians traditionally perform exposure in towers of silence, dakhimas. This isn't for bird watching. It's to avoid polluting earth, fire, and water with decaying corpses. Instead, bodies are exposed to sun and scavenging birds, allowing nature to dispose of them. It's a stark contrast to elaborate Egyptian burial practices, isn't it? No embalming fluids here, just a practical, if somewhat macabre, approach to returning the body to its elements without defiling the sacred. Imagine explaining that to a modern health inspector. Yes, well, it's for spiritual purity, you see. No wonder dakmas aren't popping up in suburban neighborhoods. The concept of a final frashocredy, or renovation, truly sets Zoroastrianism apart. At the end of time, a savior figure, a saoshyant, will appear. All souls, even those in the house of darkness, undergo purification. The world itself will be renovated, cleansed of evil and suffering, becoming perfect. It's not eternal damnation as some later traditions would envision. Even darkness is temporary, serving a purpose in the cosmic scheme of ultimate good, leading to universal resurrection and joyful existence. It's a remarkably optimistic view, a cosmic reset button, ensuring light prevails. This vision of ultimate triumph, where even bad guys get redemption after spiritual detox, offers a distinct flavor compared to absolute, forever divisions. Historians still argue whether this universal salvation was part of earliest teachings or evolved. But one thing is clear. Zoroastrianism planted the seed for a fundamentally moral afterlife, where your choices truly mattered, laying groundwork for many hell concepts to follow. You've journeyed through the sweltering heat of the Egyptian Jewett, navigated the gloomy pathways of Greek Hades, and even felt the stark moral division of Persian light and darkness. But now you step into a stillness far more profound, a quiet that wraps around you like an ancient shroud. We're moving, not through realms designed for judgment or glorious reward, but into a space that is simply there. Imagine, if you will, the deepest, most forgotten corner of a vast, unlit cavern. The air is still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something indefinable, something truly old. This isn't a place of fiery torment or blissful gardens. It's a holding pen, a cosmic waiting room, and frankly, you probably won't survive this part of the tour with your enthusiasm intact, given its sheer, unyielding blandness. Welcome to Sheol. You're no longer navigating elaborate trials or facing the stern gaze of gods poised to weigh your heart. Here, in the ancient Hebrew understanding of the afterlife, the destination is universal, a great equalizer, a shadowy pit that gathers all, saint and sinner alike. Think of it less as a vibrant afterlife and more as an eternal communal nap in the cosmic dirt. You arrive, you lie down, and you become a refame, a shade, a whisper of your former self, bereft of strength and vitality. It's a bit like showing up to a party where everyone forgot to bring the music, the snacks, or even the desire to talk. Just a lot of vaguely present individuals just being. This concept stands in stark contrast to the dramatic theatrics you encountered in Egypt, or the strict moral calculus of Zoroastrianism. In Sheol, there's no grand judgment hall, no scales tipping the balance of your deeds, no agonizing separation of the good from the bad into distinct zones of suffering or delight. Everyone, from the mightiest king to the lowliest beggar, descends into the same silent abyss. It's the ultimate shared experience, except without the Instagram-worthy moments. You simply exist, a faint echo of who you once were, stripped of earthly power, emotion, and purpose. It's the spiritual equivalent of having your Wi-Fi signal drop to 1 bar permanently. The Old Testament paints a consistent, though often vague, picture of Sheol. It's described as a land of darkness and silence, where there is no work, no knowledge, no wisdom, Ecclesiastes 9:10, for the record. It's not a place for communing with God or for receiving divine intervention. While God's power certainly extends to Sheol, if I make my bed in Sheol, behold, you are there. Psalm 139:8. It's not where vibrant worship or interaction takes place. It's more like an infinite subterranean library where all the books are blank. The spirits dwelling there are weak, passive, unable to praise God or remember his works. It's the ultimate quiet quitting, where you're not even able to complain about the lack of engagement. This absence of explicit divine judgment or differentiated eternal states within Sheol is a mainstream historical fact that often surprises people. When modern minds, steeped in later Abrahamic traditions, envision hell, they picture fire and brimstone, specific torments for specific sins. But the early Hebrews had a far more understated, less dramatic vision. Their concern was primarily with the vibrancy of life itself, with progeny, with a long and prosperous existence in the land of the living. The afterlife was a fading, a diminishment, not a fiery reckoning. It was the ultimate, fade to black, rather than a dramatic sequel. Interestingly, despite the generally passive nature of Sheol, there are a few curious instances where the living attempt to interact with the dead within its confines. Remember the Witch of Endor. King Saul, in desperation, sought her out to conjure the spirit of Samuel from Sheol. This quirky tidbit highlights a fringe belief or practice that even in this shadowy realm, a sliver of connection, however forbidden, was sometimes thought possible. It's like trying to get a signal on your old flip phone in the deepest basement. Sometimes, just sometimes, a weak connection might flicker. But generally, the dead in Sheol were beyond the reach of the living, and certainly beyond any active participation in earthly affairs. Historians still argue whether the concept of Sheol was entirely an indigenous development, or if it absorbed elements from surrounding Mesopotamian cultures. While Sheol shares some conceptual similarities with the dusty land of no return, the Mesopotamian underworld, the Hebrew version often lacked the specific demonic guardians or the detailed, bureaucratic nature seen in Babylonian myths. The focus was less on the mechanics of the journey and more on the simple fact of descent and dissolution. Was it a distinct theological leap or a subtle refinement of existing regional beliefs? The debate continues, quietly echoing in scholarly halls, much like the Rephaim in Sheol themselves. As you linger in this silent, dusty expanse, you realize the profound shift in perspective. Gone are the dramatic narratives of personal judgment that shaped your journey through Egyptian Jewett, or the clear moral lines of Persian dualism. Here, existence is stripped bare, reduced to a communal, shadowy slumber. It's not a reward. It's not a punishment. It simply is. It's the great undoing of individuality, where your vibrant personality, your hopes, your fears, all gently dissipate into a uniform shade. You become part of the collective silence, an indistinguishable mote of dust in an endless, echoing void. It makes your brief existence in the sun feel even more precious, doesn't it? Because once you're here, in this quiet, unending slumber, the concept of you begins to thin, like a forgotten photograph fading in the attic, until only the faintest impression remains. Hellenistic fusion, Judaism shifts. Witness how Greek ideas began to subtly reshape Jewish afterlife beliefs. You've been trudging through the dusty, desolate plains of Sheol for what feels like an eternity, haven't you? That murky, silent realm where kings and paupers alike muddled together in a shared, shadowy slumber. It was, let's face it, about as exciting as watching paint dry, only with less light and more existential dread. A universal holding pen, devoid of grand judgments or fiery pits. A place where, honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this eternal blandness without developing a serious case of ennui. But now, as you finally squint, something shifts on the horizon. The air hums with a different energy, a scent of olive oil and philosophy replacing the faint aroma of ancient dust. Imagine, if you will, the gentle, rhythmic lapping of the Mediterranean Sea against sun-drenched shores, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of that earlier underworld. This isn't just a change of scenery. It's a seismic shift in the intellectual landscape, brought about by the swift, conquering shadow of Alexander the Great. His empire, sprawling across the known world, wasn't just about military might. It was a cultural tsunami, washing Greek thought, language, and philosophy over virtually every civilization it touched, including, perhaps surprisingly, the stubborn, deeply rooted traditions of ancient Israel. Suddenly, you're not just dealing with the quiet whispers of ancestral spirits. You're hearing echoes of Plato and Aristotle. The Hellenistic Age, a period stretching from Alexander's death in 323 BCE until the Roman ascendancy, wasn't merely a political phase. It was an intellectual pollination. Greek ideas about the soul, about justice, about a highly structured cosmos, started to seep into the very foundations of Jewish belief. Remember how the Greeks, with their Hades and Tartarus and Elysium, were already big fans of differentiated afterlives. Well, buckle up, because those concepts, once alien, began to knock politely on the doors of Jewish theology, and in some cases barge right in, uninvited but ultimately transformative. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic conversion, mind you. Think of it less as an invasion and more as a slow, steady cultural osmosis. You find yourself in bustling markets, overhearing debates in Koine Greek, the common language of the era, about the nature of existence, the immortality of the soul, and the concept of divine retribution. It's like switching from black and white television to glorious Technicolor, albeit a slightly unsettling one when your religious texts were perfectly happy in monochrome for centuries. This gradual absorption meant that Jewish thinkers, grappling with their traditions in a rapidly Hellenized world, began to find new ways to articulate old truths, sometimes inadvertently, adopting new frameworks. One of the most significant conduits for this cultural exchange was the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. Imagine a team of scholars, perched precariously on stools in Alexandria, trying to render nuanced Hebrew concepts into a language that had a completely different philosophical underpinning. This wasn't just a word-for-word swap. It was an interpretive act. For example, the Hebrew Sheol, that vague, shadowy pit, might be translated in some instances by Greek terms like Hades, which, as you recall from our last little jaunt through the Greek underworld, carried a far more complex baggage of judgment and distinct realms. Historians still argue whether these translation choices reflected an already changing Jewish worldview or actively contributed to its evolution, subtly nudging the understanding of the afterlife toward Greek paradigms. It's a bit of a chicken or egg scenario, only with more ancient scrolls and fewer actual chickens. As time wore on, the once solid concept of Sheol as a uniform destiny for all began to crack under the weight of new theological pressures. If God was truly just, how could the righteous and the wicked share the exact same fate in the afterlife? This question, sharpened by Greek philosophical discourse on divine justice and individual accountability, became increasingly pressing. You start to hear whispers, then louder pronouncements about resurrection, not just a general reanimation for a collective future, but a more individual, personalized awakening. This was a radical departure from the traditional Sheol concept, suggesting that your earthly actions might actually matter beyond the grave, leading to a differentiated post-mortem experience. Suddenly, that blandness of Sheol doesn't seem quite so universal, does it? This ferment of ideas gave rise to distinct factions within Judaism. The Sadducees, for instance, clung fiercely to the older traditions, rejecting the notion of resurrection and an afterlife of reward and punishment, sticking firmly to the Torah's literal interpretations. They were, in essence, the traditionalists who liked their afterlife concept simple and understated. Thank you very much. But then you have the Pharisees, a much larger and more influential group, who enthusiastically embraced the concept of resurrection and a moral afterlife. They saw these new ideas not as corruptions, but as logical extensions of God's justice, perhaps even as clarifications revealed through ongoing divine interpretation. It was a fascinating internal debate, essentially a philosophical wrestling match over the eternal destiny of your very soul. A soul that, for many, was now conceived as an immortal essence distinct from the body. A very Greek idea indeed. A quirky tidbit from this era. Some Jewish apocryphal texts from the Hellenistic period, like the Book of Enoch, dive headfirst into incredibly detailed, almost hallucinatory descriptions of the afterlife, complete with distinct compartments for the righteous and the wicked, places of fire and torment for the damned, and glorious abodes for the blessed. These aren't just vague mentions. They are vivid, almost cinematic tour of the underworld, complete with angelic guides and meticulous categorizations of sins and their corresponding eternal punishments. It's a far cry from the monochromatic gloom of Sheol, isn't it? It's as if someone finally handed the Jewish scribes a map to the afterlife, and they decided to fill in all the blanks with technicolor horror and wonder, clearly drawing inspiration from the more elaborate cosmological frameworks provided by their Greek neighbors. It truly makes you wonder if they were just borrowing ideas, or if perhaps they simply felt it was time to update the neighborhood association rules for the afterlife. The mainstream historical fact here is the significant influence of Hellenistic culture, particularly Greek philosophy and language, on Jewish thought during this period, leading to the development of new theological concepts like individual resurrection and a differentiated afterlife, which contrasted sharply with earlier Sheol traditions. This interaction wasn't just superficial. It penetrated deeply into religious discourse, laying groundwork for future developments in Abrahamic faiths. This period truly highlights how profound cultural exchange can be, even for deeply entrenched belief systems. You might think your beliefs are set in stone, but give it a few centuries and a philosophical powerhouse like ancient Greece, and suddenly, that stone starts looking a lot more like clay. Now you begin to see how the stage is being set for something far more complex, far more consequential. The idea that your life here might dictate your eternal destiny is taking root, blossoming from the sterile soil of Sheol into something thorny, and for some, terrifyingly beautiful. New Testament Gehenna, fiery warnings. You find yourself standing on the precipice, gazing down into the valley of Hinnom, the very air seeming to thicken with a history far too heavy for comfort. It's not just the scent of decay that hangs in the air, but the echo of ancient warnings, warnings that would, in time, shape humanity's deepest fears about the beyond. Your breath catches, just a little as you recall those earlier, more nebulous notions of the afterlife, the dusty sleep of Sheol. Remember that quiet pit where everyone just slept, or the somewhat indifferent underworld of Hades, where even the punishments were primarily for defiant gods and mythological figures. Now, prepare yourself, because things are about to get considerably warmer. And just a quick reality check for you. If you ever end up in the place we're discussing, you probably won't survive this in any recognizable, come back for seconds sort of way. Consider yourself forewarned. This valley, known in Greek as Gehenna, was more than just a dumping ground, though it certainly became one. Historically, it was a site of unimaginable horror, a place where, centuries before Jesus walked the earth, some desperate, misguided Israelites engaged in the chilling practice of child sacrifice to the god Moloch. Can you picture it? The flickering fires, the desperate pleas, the unspeakable acts carried out in the shadows, acts so grievous that they stain the very ground. It's enough to make your soul shiver, isn't it? Later, perhaps as a deliberate act of purification or a symbolic rejection of such abominations, it transitioned into Jerusalem's refuse dump. Imagine the constant, acrid smoke, the perpetual smolder of burning trash, the flies thick as a curtain, drawn by the stench of decay, a place of unending decomposition, literal worms, and an ever-present, low-level heat. It was, in essence, a living, breathing metaphor for utter desolation, a place of shame and perpetual defilement, long before it took on its ultimate, terrifying meaning in the lexicon of eternal judgment. And it's this vivid, visceral imagery that Jesus so powerfully leveraged. When he spoke to his audiences, who were well-versed in the shifts brought by Hellenistic thought and the lingering memories of Sheol, he didn't need to invent a new boogeyman. He simply pointed to a place they knew, a place of historical trauma and ongoing revulsion, and he imbued it with profound spiritual consequence. He described a realm where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. Just picture that for a moment. An unending process of decomposition, a relentless, unceasing incineration. It's not a quick, merciful end, is it? It's a prolonged, agonizing permanence, a state of being eternally consumed without ever being fully destroyed. He often spoke of being cast into outer darkness, a place of profound, isolating separation, punctuated only by weeping and gnashing of teeth. You can almost hear the raw anguish, the grinding frustration of utter despair, the sounds of those who recognize their ultimate, irrevocable loss. You know, you'd think with all that teeth gnashing, ancient dentists would have been out of a job. But apparently, even eternal torment comes with its own unique dental problems, proving that some things, like cavities, are truly timeless. He painted pictures of a furnace of fire, a place where the unrighteous would be separated from the righteous, like chaff from wheat, destined for eternal punishment. This wasn't the quiet, communal sleep of Sheol anymore. This was a deliberate, active, and profoundly unpleasant consequence for moral failings. A complete and terrifying departure from the idea of a simple descent into a shadowy abode shared by all. It was a stark, almost brutal shift in the narrative of the afterlife, a move from a general, shadowy existence to a specific, fiery reckoning based on one's earthly deeds. The intensity of his language was unmistakable. He spoke with an authority that left little room for misinterpretation of the severity he intended to convey. Historians still argue whether these graphic descriptions were intended as literal depictions of a physical hell, a place of actual eternal flames and literal worms, or if they were powerful parables, hyperbolic warnings designed to compel repentance and righteous living. Was Jesus describing a literal fiery abyss? Or was he using the most potent and understandable imagery available to convey the profound spiritual suffering of absolute separation from divine grace? The scholarly debate, much like the ancient fires of Gehenna, continues to smolder, its embers casting long, uncertain shadows over centuries of theological interpretation. Some scholars lean towards a metaphorical understanding, suggesting that the horror of Gehenna was meant to convey the consequences of sin, not a detailed architectural blueprint of the afterlife. Others insist on a more literal interpretation, seeing in Jesus's words a definitive declaration of a terrifying, eternal destination for the unrepentant. Now for a slightly lighter, perhaps even quirky, thought. Certain early Jewish traditions actually held that the fires of Gehenna, for those destined to endure them, would cease on the Sabbath. Imagine that. A tiny, bittersweet reprieve from the flames, a brief moment of quiet before the eternal inferno was rekindled once the holy day passed. It's like getting a 2-day weekend from cosmic damnation, which, let's be honest, is still better than no weekend at all, but probably not quite the getaway you had in mind. This fascinating tidbit underscores the profound mental gymnastics people undertook to reconcile these terrifying visions with a concept of a just and merciful deity. It highlights the human desire to find slivers of hope, or even just logic within the most dreadful of concepts. The idea of divine judgment, once a shadowy, somewhat passive concept, had now taken on a terrifyingly vivid, fiery form, a form that would burn itself into the collective consciousness for millennia to come, irrevocably altering the very understanding of what lay beyond the veil of life. This was no longer just the general land of no return, like the Mesopotamians imagined, nor the judgment purely for titans as the Greeks sometimes conceived. This was a personal, moral judgment with truly eternal and horrifying implications, deeply etched into the fabric of the New Testament narrative. You've just left the roaring inferno of Gehenna, the fiery warnings of Jesus still echoing in your ears, a vivid, almost tangible heat on your face. But how do those warnings morph from compelling parables into codified, immovable doctrine? You find yourself now, not in dusty desert lands, but in the flickering light of early Christian scriptoria, the scent of oil lamps and aged parchment thick in the air. The hushed reverence is palpable, almost as if the very walls breathe quiet contemplation. You watch as earnest scribes, hunched over their vellum, carefully copy and debate the weighty pronouncements that would define an entire civilization's understanding of eternity. Here, in these fledgling communities, the concept of a permanent, inescapable damnation truly begins to solidify, hardening from a fiery metaphor into an unyielding, theological bedrock. It's like watching cement dry, except this cement is made of pure, unadulterated terror and divine judgment. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this part of the lecture without at least one existential sigh. You see a figure emerge from the shadows, a man named Tertullian from Carthage, around the turn of the 3rd century. He's a lawyer by trade, and he brings that legal precision, that unforgiving logic to theological matters. He practically snorts at the idea of any wishy-washy, temporary suffering. For Tertullian, the fires of hell are very real, very physical, and very, very eternal. He paints a truly grim picture, reveling almost gleefully in the spectacle of the damned. He famously wrote, and you can practically hear the mic drop, "How vast a spectacle then in that day! How vast a joy, how vast a transport, when I shall behold so many proud monarchs groaning in the lowest darkness." It's a bit much, isn't it? Like he's planning a celestial watch party, but only for the good guys. His vision is unyielding. Hell is not just a place of punishment, but also a vindication of God's justice, a permanent monument to divine wrath. He set a rather fiery tone, cementing the idea that hell wasn't a temporary timeout, but a full-blown, no-parole, eternal sentence. Then, you encounter Origen of Alexandria, a brilliant but ultimately controversial mind from the same era. He's the scholarly type, hunched over his scrolls, muttering complex Greek. Origen, bless his heart, tried to soften the blow a bit. He proposed the concept of apokatastasis, or universal restoration. Imagine, if you will, a divine cosmic rehabilitation program where eventually everyone, yes, even the devil himself, if you squint hard enough, would be reconciled with God. It was a beautiful, optimistic, and frankly, rather inconvenient idea for those who liked their hell hot and eternal. He believed that God's love was so profound that it would ultimately lead all creation back to him, even if it took eons of purgative fire. Historians still argue whether Origen truly believed in the ultimate salvation of the devil, or if he was simply exploring a theological possibility, but his ideas certainly stirred the pot. It's like that one friend who always tries to find the silver lining, even when you're talking about, eternal damnation. Unsurprisingly, his views on universal restoration were later condemned as heresy. Clearly, some doctrines were just too comforting to be true, at least in the eyes of the burgeoning church. As the centuries roll on, you feel the shifting sands of theological debate underfoot, finally settling around the towering intellect of Augustine of Hippo in the 4th and 5th centuries. This is the big one, the heavy hitter whose shadow stretches across 1,000 years of Western thought. Augustine, with his profound insights into original sin, grace, and predestination, firmly establishes the doctrine of eternal hell as a core tenet of Christian belief. He grappled with the problem of evil and divine justice, concluding that eternal punishment was a just consequence for sin, especially original sin, which had tainted all humanity. He argued vehemently against Origen's ideas of universal salvation, emphasizing the unchangeable nature of the damned's fate. For Augustine, the fire of hell was both literal and metaphorical, a physical torment combined with the far worse anguish of eternal separation from God. It was a bleak prognosis, a sort of cosmic, it is what it is, for the unfortunate souls on the wrong side of divine judgment. He even pondered whether unbaptized infants, through no fault of their own, were consigned to a less severe but still eternal state of damnation. Talk about a tough crowd. Augustine's influence was colossal. He provided the logical and philosophical framework that would underpin the Western Church's understanding of hell for centuries to come. His writings solidified the notion that eternal damnation was not a negotiable concept, but a fixed and terrifying reality for the unrepentant. It was his clarity, his intellectual rigor, that made the concept of hell less a vague threat and more a terrifying certainty. You could say he put the firm in firmament of damnation. You also observe figures like Gregory the Great in the 6th century, who, while emphasizing the existence of purgatory as a place for lesser sins to be expiated before heaven, never wavered from the absolute permanence of hell for the truly wicked. He helped popularize vivid imagery of hell, drawing on biblical descriptions to make the infernal realm terrifyingly real for the common person, shaping medieval piety and fear. The early church fathers, through their extensive writings, sermons, and debates, meticulously constructed the theological edifice of eternal damnation. They took the varied threads of New Testament warnings, the Jewish concept of Gehenna, and the philosophical underpinnings of divine justice, weaving them into a detailed, terrifying tapestry of an eternal hell. They weren't just interpreting, they were defining, adding layers of theological complexity and certainty to a concept that would forever shape the human psyche and religious practice. The doctrine was now, quite literally, set in stone, or at least in ink on parchment, ready to be copied, taught, and feared for millennia to come. You've wrestled with the fiery warnings of Gehenna, felt the icy grip of eternal damnation as early church fathers solidified their doctrines. You've seen punishment become a permanent fixture in the Christian narrative. But now you step into a realm where the heat isn't just a concept. It's a living, breathing, all-consuming entity. Imagine, if you will, the most scorching summer day you've ever endured, amplified by 1,000 suns, then distilled into a suffocating, inescapable reality. The air itself feels like molten lead, pressing in on you from every direction. Your very skin prickles, then blisters, then feels as though it's flaying itself from your bones, not in an instant, but in an agonizing, drawn-out eternity. This, my friend, is your initial greeting to Jahannam. And let's be real, you probably won't survive this, at least not in any recognizable form. You're not just warm, you're immersed. The Quran paints a picture of a hell that is intensely physical, where the torment isn't merely spiritual, but a brutal, relentless assault on every sense. You feel the heat deep within your marrow, hear the roaring and crackling of the flames as they rise and fall, a terrifying symphony of suffering. And the thirst, oh, the thirst. It's an unbearable, insatiable craving that makes every previous dehydration headache feel like a mere tickle. You beg for water, but what's offered? Boiling water, scalding and putrid, that tears through your insides as you attempt to quench that desperate need. It's less a drink and more a destructive internal cleansing, a final, ironic twist in a place designed for maximum discomfort. It makes that one time you accidentally drank too hot coffee look like a spa treatment. Mainstream Islamic theology firmly establishes Jahannam not as a metaphorical state, but as a literal, tangible place, a consequence for those who denied God's signs, transgressed his laws, or lived lives of grave sin without repentance. It serves as the ultimate expression of divine justice, a place where every misdeed, Every act of arrogance or oppression finds its precise and agonizing recompense. Unlike some earlier, more nebulous afterlives, here, the consequences are stark, specific, and vividly described. You might wonder if there's anything to eat. Well, there is the Zaquam tree, a truly bizarre culinary experience you probably didn't sign up for. Imagine a tree whose fruit resembles devil's heads, described as being like molten brass or oil, boiling in the bellies like raging fire. It's a meal that not only fails to nourish, but actively exacerbates your agony, clinging to your stomach as if it were 1,000 barbed hooks. It sounds less like a fruit, and more like something you'd accidentally step on with bare feet. And if that's not enough, your clothes? They're made of fire, literally. You're dressed in agony, wrapped in the very flames that consume you. It really puts a damper on your fashion sense, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether the extreme specificity of these descriptions was meant primarily as a literal depiction of future torment, or as a powerful rhetorical device to impress upon early Muslim communities the dire consequences of disobedience. Then there are the chains. Not just any chains, mind you, but chains of immense length described as 70 cubits long, used to bind the damned, dragging them through the scorching fire. Imagine being shackled, not just metaphorically, but truly, physically bound, then pulled through a blazing inferno. It's a bit like a very, very ill-advised game of tug-of-war, where you're always the rope, and the fire always wins. And for those who try to escape, or even just climb out, the guardians of Jahannam, stern and unyielding angels, are there to drag them back down, ensuring no respite, no moment of peace. You're reminded of that dusty journey in Sumer, remember? But here, the dust is ash, and the journey is eternal. A particularly quirky tidbit about Jahannam involves its 7 distinct levels or gates, each designated for different types of sinners, or perhaps different degrees of sin. While some interpretations see these as literal architectural features, others view them as symbolic of increasing severity of punishment. It's like a multi-level car park of despair, only instead of trying to find your vehicle, you're just trying to find a momentary reprieve from the heat. Some traditions even describe a massive bridge, thinner than a hair and sharper than a sword, spanning over Jahannam, which believers must cross to reach paradise, while the disbelievers fall into the abyss below. It's the ultimate trust fall, but with significantly higher stakes than your average team-building exercise. The descriptions in the Quran are relentless, focusing on the sensory overload of suffering. You're not just burning. Your skin is renewed each time it's consumed, ensuring the pain is never-ending. Your eyes bulge, your hearts pound, and every nerve ending screams in protest. Yet there is no end to the experience, no fading to black. The sustenance you receive only fuels the agony, rather than alleviating it. This is a place where comfort is an alien concept, and every element of the environment conspires to inflict maximum distress. It makes you almost miss the simple concept of having your heart weighed, doesn't it? At least there was a chance of passing that test. The question of eternity in Jahannam is an open scholarly debate within Islamic thought. While the Quran uses terms that imply permanence, such as abiding therein forever, some scholars, particularly those of a more reformist or compassionate bent, have argued for a potential end to the torment for certain categories of sinners, perhaps after a cleansing period. Others maintain that for the worst offenders, or those who died in a state of unbelief, the punishment is truly perpetual, a reflection of the infinite nature of the offense against an infinitely just God. It's a theological puzzle that continues to be discussed, offering a sliver of interpretative hope in a concept otherwise steeped in unyielding dread. But for you, right now, as the flames lick at your feet, that debate feels 1,000,000 miles away, and eternity seems to stretch on without end. You feel the chill before you see it, a bone-deep cold that seeps into your very marrow, far colder than any winter night you've ever shivered through. Colder even than that time you accidentally left your freezer door ajar overnight and woke up to an ice age in your kitchen. This isn't the kind of cold you can bundle up against. It's an ancient, primordial frost, a vast, echoing emptiness where even light struggles to assert itself. You're trudging now through an endless, swirling mist, your breath pluming out like tiny, futile ghosts against a backdrop of inky blackness, punctuated only by the glint of distant, impossibly sharp ice formations. Imagine the most remote, desolate Arctic landscape. Strip it of all life, all warmth, all sound save the occasional creak and groan of shifting glaciers, and then amplify its grim, unyielding emptiness 1,000-fold. That, my friend, is a whisper of what awaits you in Norse Niflheim. And just a heads up, you probably won't survive this. Metaphorically speaking, of course. For real-life survival tips, consult a reputable mountaineering guide, not this sleepy narrative. Unlike the fiery pits of Jahannam or the scorching warnings of Gehenna, we've just navigated. Niflheim isn't about punishment by flame. Oh no, the Norse pantheon had a different kind of eternal discomfort in mind. Here, it's the absence of everything that truly chills you. It's not a place designed for screaming, for gnashing of teeth, or for desperate pleas for mercy. It's a realm of quiet, persistent desolation, a place where the very concept of warmth seems like a forgotten dream. Think of it as the universe's most extreme, least hospitable deep freeze, where the main torment isn't active torture but the sheer, mind-numbing monotony of an existence devoid of light, heat, or purpose. It's less hellfire and brimstone, and more eternal Monday morning commute in a blizzard, without coffee or working heating. You remember how we talked about different cultures creating afterlives based on their greatest fears? Well, if the ancient Mesopotamians feared dust and shadow, and the Egyptians feared losing their precious hearts to the devourer, the Norse, living in a land of harsh winters and unforgiving landscapes, certainly understood the profound terror of unrelenting cold. Niflheim, often considered one of the 9 worlds connected by Yggdrasil, the mighty world tree, is more than just a gloomy underworld. It's an primordial realm, one of the 2 foundational realms from which all of creation sprung. Before gods or giants, before humans or dwarves, there was only the searing heat of Muspelheim and the crushing cold of Niflheim. And in the vast, empty void between them, called Ginnungagap, the interaction of these 2 extremes gave rise to life. Mainstream historical fact alert. The earliest cosmological myths in Norse tradition describe the universe beginning with the clash of these elemental forces, ice from Niflheim and fire from Muspelheim, which melted to form the primordial giant Ymir, from whose body the world was then fashioned. It's a bit like a cosmic R&D project, where a very cold lab and a very hot lab produced, well, everything. Within Niflheim lies Helheim, the realm specifically presided over by Hel, the rather charming goddess of the dead, daughter of Loki. Yes, that Loki, never a dull family gathering with them. Hel herself is often depicted as half-living, half-corpse, with one side of her face beautiful and the other decaying. A perfect visual metaphor for the duality of life and death she governs. Now this is where the not-quite-punitive part really comes into play. You see, Helheim wasn't reserved for the wicked or the morally bankrupt. Instead, It was the destination for those who died of illness, old age, or in any manner not glorious enough for Valhalla or Folkvanger. If you kicked the bucket in your sleep, or succumbed to a nasty case of the sniffles, or simply slipped on some black ice and met your maker unheroically, Helheim was your post-mortem retirement plan. It wasn't a place of torture. It was simply a realm of the dead, a neutral zone where shadows gathered. Imagine having to spend eternity with all the people who died from paper cuts and stubbed toes. Talk about a population problem. The experience of Helheim, while cold and dark, wasn't about active suffering imposed by divine judgment. It was more about an unending, bleak sameness. There were no fiery torments, no eternal scourging, no agonizing thirst. Instead, you'd likely experience a perpetual dimness, a pervasive chill, and a profound sense of isolation. It's less about being actively punished and more about being passively bored. And cold. Very, very cold. Think of it as the ultimate time-out corner, but for eternity and without any snacks. Historians still argue whether the perceived lack of punishment in Niflheim was a pure reflection of pre-Christian Norse belief, or if later Christian chroniclers, accustomed to their own fiery hells, simply didn't fully grasp or adequately record the more subtle discomforts or banalities of the Norse underworld. Was it truly just a dreary waiting room? Or were there more nuanced forms of discomfort that simply didn't translate well to a worldview obsessed with sin and redemption? One quirky tidbit about Helheim, or Niflheim in general, involves the river Gjørl, which flows through it. It's said to be an icy river, and crossing it required navigating treacherous currents and a bridge guarded by Modgutter, a female giant. But the truly fringe element? Some interpretations suggest that a specific type of cold, an almost magical cold, emanated from Niflheim, so potent it could affect the living world, causing blizzards and deep freezes. It wasn't just cold. It was the cold, capital T, capital C, like a sentient, icy entity. So next time you're scraping ice off your windshield at 5 a.m., just remember, it might not just be a polar vortex. It could be a primordial whisper from Niflheim reaching out to say hello. Or, more accurately, to remind you that your hands are freezing. So, while you wouldn't be flayed alive or roasted on a spit in Niflheim, you also wouldn't be enjoying celestial harps or endless feasts. You'd simply be in the cold, forever. It's a stark contrast to the dramatic, morally charged afterlives we've explored. Remember the careful balance of scales in Juet, or the absolute certainty of divine justice in Jahannam. Niflheim, by comparison, feels almost indifferent. It simply is. It serves as a stark reminder that not all ancient cultures conceived of the afterlife as a place primarily for divine retribution. Sometimes the greatest fear wasn't eternal suffering, but eternal, unyielding, mind-numbingly cold boredom. You step out of the stark, almost indifferent chill of Norse Niflheim, leaving behind its unfeeling mists, and suddenly the air around you shimmers with an entirely different kind of infernal heat, or perhaps an equally intense but oddly purposeful cold. You find yourself standing at the precipice of Buddhist Naraka, a realm where suffering isn't merely a punishment, but a meticulously calibrated mechanism for purification. It's a bit like a cosmic detox retreat, except the smoothies are made of molten iron, and the yoga poses involve being flayed by demonic attendants. But here's the kicker, the truly mind-bending part of this particular corner of the afterlife multiverse. It's not forever. You heard that right. This isn't a one-way ticket to eternal damnation. It's more of a very, very unpleasant but ultimately temporary, layover on the grand journey of samsara, the cycle of rebirth. Imagine, for a moment, that every unkind word you've ever spoken, every sneaky shortcut you've ever taken, every tiny piece of bad karma you've accumulated like digital dust bunnies under the cosmic sofa, now manifests as a perfectly tailored consequence. That's Naraka. These aren't just one or two hells. Oh no, Buddhism offers a veritable buffet of suffering, typically categorized into 8 hot Narakas and 8 cold Narakas, though some traditions list many more, creating what feels less like a simple pit and more like a multi-level cosmic car park designed by a sadist. You might find yourself in the reviving hell, where you're repeatedly cut to pieces only to be reassembled by an icy wind, just so you can be cut up again. Or perhaps the black string hell, where demonic carpenters draw black lines on your body, then saw you along them. Frankly, after experiencing just 5 minutes of some of these, you'd probably beg for Niflheim's chill. But good luck with that. You won't survive this conceptually without a little cognitive dissonance. The purpose, you see, isn't to simply punish you for eternity, but to burn away negative karma. It's a bit like putting your spiritual laundry through an industrial-strength hot wash cycle. Once the karmic residue is sufficiently cleansed, once the balance is restored, you move on. You're reborn into another realm, perhaps as a human, an animal, a hungry ghost, or even a god. It's all part of the continuous ebb and flow of existence, a far cry from the definitive. You're in or you're out judgment systems we've explored before. Think of it as a really strict boarding school for your soul, where the disciplinary measures are quite extreme, but eventually you graduate. Though one wonders about the exit interviews. So, how was your stay in the screaming hell? We hope you enjoyed the auditory experience. Don't forget to fill out our Yelp review on your way out. Historically speaking, the concept of Naraka developed and diversified significantly across different Buddhist traditions as the religion spread from its origins in India. Early Buddhist texts mention realms of suffering, but the more elaborate and graphically detailed descriptions, particularly those involving specific tortures and the precise duration of stays, became more prominent in later Mahayana Buddhist scriptures and their subsequent adoption in East Asian and Tibetan Buddhism. For instance, the vivid imagery and complex hierarchies of hells often seen in Chinese and Japanese Buddhist art found their roots in sutras like the Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva Sutra, which became incredibly popular and solidified public understanding of these realms. It's a testament to the human imagination's ability to conjure up truly dreadful scenarios, even with the promise of eventual release. Now, for a slightly more esoteric tidbit. Among the most dreaded of these temporary hells is Avasai Naraka, often translated as the hell without interruption, or interminable hell. It's said to be the lowest and most agonizing of the hot Narakas, where the suffering is so continuous and intense that there isn't even the slightest pause between moments of pain. It's where those who commit the most heinous karmic acts, like matricide or patricide, find themselves. And when they say interminable, they mean it feels like it, even if it's technically finite. Imagine being stuck in an elevator with infinite floors and no music, except the elevator is also on fire, and you're constantly being poked with hot pokers. You'd probably still rather be watching the entire back catalog of reality TV shows, wouldn't you? Yet, even with such vivid descriptions, historians still argue whether the more explicit and graphically detailed portrayals of Naraka in later Buddhist traditions represent an indigenous development, expanding on earlier, more subtle notions of suffering, or if they were subtly influenced by pre-existing ideas of punitive afterlives from other religious traditions encountered during Buddhism's vast spread across Asia. Did the fiery rhetoric of Zoroastrianism, for example, or even nascent Christian ideas, trickle into the Buddhist imagination and amplify the depictions of karmic retribution? It's a fascinating chicken-and-egg question, a scholarly debate that unfolds across centuries of textual analysis and archaeological discovery. So, while the suffering in Naraka might sound incredibly, excruciatingly awful, remember that it's all part of a grander, cyclical purpose. You pay your karmic dues, you learn your lessons, presumably, and then you're eligible for a new start. It's a testament to the Buddhist emphasis on personal responsibility and the continuous potential for transformation. There's no eternal condemnation, just a very long, very uncomfortable period of deep reflection, usually involving molten metal or extreme temperatures. It's like being forced to do every single chore you ever avoided, all at once, with a demon supervisor. You'd get through it eventually. And once you do, you're back on the cosmic merry-go-round, perhaps even closer to achieving nirvana, the ultimate liberation from suffering. It's just a temporary stop, albeit one that makes the land of no return and its dusty dreariness seem almost like a spa day. You just have to survive the purification. And trust me, after a few million years of that, you'll probably be begging for a quiet retirement home in Sheol, just to get some proper sleep. And so, as we drift from the chilling, cleansing fires of Buddhist Naraka, where suffering is merely a spiritual scrub-down, we find ourselves gently pulled into another cosmic current, one that also understands the value of a good, albeit painful, lesson. You feel a familiar, subtle shift, a cosmic hum that vibrates deep in your bones, signaling that the rules of the afterlife are once again subtly, yet profoundly, changing. This time, you're not just observing a system of purification. You're being drawn into the vast, intricate tapestry of Hindu thought, where the very fabric of existence is woven from karma, reincarnation, and yes, even its own set of challenging, temporary purgatories. Imagine, if you will, the scent of jasmine and sandalwood in the air, a distant temple bell chiming, even as a creeping sense of accountability begins to settle over you. Here, in the sprawling, kaleidoscopic universe of Hinduism, the concept of a hell isn't a final destination of eternal damnation. Oh no, that would be far too simple, far too permanent for a cosmic cycle that prides itself on endless returns and infinite chances. Instead, you encounter Naraka, a collection of provisional realms, more like cosmic correctional facilities than the fiery abyss we've been picturing. You're not being condemned for eternity. You're being sent to a rather intense spiritual boot camp. Think of it as a mandatory gap year, only instead of finding yourself in Thailand, you might be in something resembling a perpetually simmering pot. The guiding principle here, the very bedrock of this particular afterlife landscape, is karma. Remember that cosmic ledger we talked about, way back when we were discussing Persian dualism and the balance of good versus evil? Well, in Hinduism, karma isn't just about good or bad deeds. It's about actions, intentions, and their precise, inevitable repercussions. Every thought, every word, every deed you've ever committed, it all adds up. A meticulously detailed cosmic tax return that determines your next stop on the grand wheel of samsara, the cycle of rebirth. If you're thinking, great, I'll just avoid the really bad stuff, remember that even a tiny misstep, karmically speaking, could land you in a spiritual timeout that feels like an eternity. Honestly, you probably won't survive this cosmic report card unscathed. The detailed descriptions of these Narakas, these temporary hellish realms, are primarily found in later Hindu scriptures, most notably the Puranas and the Dharma Shastras. These texts, vast compendiums of myths, rituals, and philosophical discourse, lay out an astonishing array of unpleasantries designed to burn away specific karmic debts. You're not just in hell, generally. You're in the precise Naraka tailored to your specific spiritual screw-up. It's like having a personalized punishment plan designed by a cosmic efficiency expert. Did you, perhaps, steal something? There's a Naraka for that. Did you misuse your power? Oh boy, is there a Naraka for that. Did you just exist a bit too smugly? They've got something cooking for you too. Take, for instance, the Naraka known as Rorava, the Roaring Hell. Here, those who inflict suffering upon others are tormented by fiery, spear-wielding entities called Ruris, which are, rather disturbingly, described as a kind of monstrous animal-human hybrid. Or perhaps you're headed for Kumbhipakam, the pot-cooking hell, reserved for those who harm animals, where you yourself are boiled alive in oil by the Yamadutas, the messengers of Yama, the god of death. It's certainly a vivid lesson in empathy, if nothing else. And then there's Tamisra, darkness, for those who steal another's property, where you're bound and beaten in utter gloom. It's all very specific, very direct, and very much about experiencing the consequences of your actions in a way that, let's be honest, would make even the most hardened tax evader consider a career change. One rather quirky tidbit, if you're looking for a specific example of this meticulous cosmic accounting, involves the Naraka called Sukaramaka. This delightful realm is designated for rulers or officials who abuse their power, or those who unjustly punish the innocent. In Sukaramaka, the transgressor is crushed and tormented by the very instruments of oppression they wielded in life, often taking the form of iron rods and clubs, with the added bonus of being prodded by creatures with boar-like snouts. It's a very pointed message about accountability, proving that the universe has a surprisingly long memory, especially when it comes to administrative malfeasance. The duration of your stay in any given Naraka is not eternal. It's proportional to the karma accrued from your misdeeds. Once that specific karmic debt is paid, once the cosmic slate is sufficiently cleansed, you are released, reborn into another physical form, ready to continue your journey through samsara. This could be as a human, an animal, or even a plant. It all depends on your remaining karmic balance. It's a bit like being sent to detention, serving your time, and then being allowed back into the classroom, hopefully a little wiser for the experience. There's always the chance for growth, for learning, for eventually achieving moksha, liberation from the cycle of rebirth itself. This concept of temporary hells, as a means to purification and eventual progress on the spiritual path, is a mainstream historical fact that deeply differentiates the Hindu afterlife from the absolute finality found in many Abrahamic traditions. Now, historians still argue whether the detailed descriptions of Naraka in the Puranas are primarily literal warnings or allegorical representations of the consequences of actions, intended more for moral guidance than literal geography. Were these gruesome details meant to be taken as actual travel itineraries for the wicked? Or were they elaborate parables designed to instill moral behavior and social cohesion? The truth, as is often the case with ancient wisdom, probably lies somewhere in the middle. They certainly served as powerful deterrents, encouraging people to live a righteous life lest they find themselves boiling in oil or worse, dealing with celestial boars. The sheer imaginative power behind these descriptions, even if symbolic, is a testament to the deep human desire to understand and manage the repercussions of our choices. So, as you ponder the nuances of cosmic justice, remember that in this particular corner of the afterlife, even the toughest lessons are ultimately for your benefit. The suffering isn't arbitrary. It's a meticulously calculated process of balancing the books, preparing you for your next, hopefully more enlightened, turn on the great wheel. You might emerge a little singed, perhaps a little sore, but you'll definitely have a better appreciation for good karma. And maybe, just maybe, you'll think twice before taking that last cookie. You step now not into some vague shadowland, but into a place meticulously, horrifyingly mapped out. The air here doesn't just feel cold or dusty. It thrums with the screams of the eternally damned, each torment precisely calibrated, each sinner receiving their just, or perhaps unjust, deserts. You see the sheer architectural ambition of it, a chasm descending, circle by chilling circle, each deeper, darker, and more profoundly dreadful than the last. You're not just imagining a fiery pit. You're imagining the texture of the flames, the sound of the wailing, the specific agonies inflicted for very specific sins. This isn't a blurry, conceptual suffering. This is hell rendered in high definition, 3D surround sound horror. And frankly, darling, you probably won't survive this part. This is the era when hell ceased to be just a concept and became a terrifyingly tangible place in the collective imagination of Western Europe, largely thanks to one incredibly imaginative Florentine poet, Dante Alighieri. His epic journey, penned in the early 14th century, didn't just describe hell, it built it, brick by miserable brick, in the minds of millions. Before Dante, the Christian understanding of hell, while certainly grim, was still somewhat amorphous. Yes, there was fire and brimstone and weeping and gnashing of teeth, but the precise layout, the specific punishments, the bureaucratic efficiency of eternal damnation, that was largely Dante's chilling contribution. You could say he was the original infernal city planner. He didn't invent the concept of hell, of course. We've seen its seeds sprouting from the earliest human fears, through the dusty Mesopotamian underworlds, the judgment halls of Egyptian Jewett, and the various Greek and Norse realms. Even the early Christian church fathers had solidified the idea of eternal damnation. But Dante, oh, Dante took it and gave it a meticulous, visceral reality. He codified it, categorized it, and made it so vividly horrifying that it practically leaped off the page and into the nightmares of generations. His Inferno, the first part of his monumental divine comedy, wasn't just a poem. It was a medieval tour guide to ultimate suffering. Imagine, for a moment, tracing his footsteps. You descend through the gates of hell, famously inscribed with the terrifying line, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." And honestly, you probably should. The very first circle, limbo, isn't even that bad. It's where the virtuous pagans, like Virgil, who guides Dante, reside, forever yearning for God but suffering no physical torment. A bit like being stuck in eternal airport lounge purgatory, but with better company. But from there, it gets exponentially worse. You're pushed deeper, past the lustful blown about in an eternal tempest, their earthly passions mirroring their unending torment. Then come the gluttonous, wallowing in vile, icy slush, pelted by eternal freezing rain, guarded by the three-headed dog Cerberus. Remember those vague, shadowy pits of Sheol? This is a whole different ballgame. You can practically feel the cold, the slime, the oppressive weight of the atmosphere. Dante didn't just say punished for gluttony. He showed you how they were punished with an almost scientific precision. He even gave the demons names and personalities, making them feel like truly dreadful, petty, and powerful wardens. This systematic approach, classifying sins and assigning specific, symbolic punishments, was a radical departure. For the wrathful, they endlessly tear each other apart in the muddy river Styx. For the greedy and the wasteful, they push huge weights against each other, forever locked in a pointless struggle, screaming, "Why did you hoard? And why did you squander?" It's like a cosmic game of tug-of-war, where both sides lose forever. The sheer meticulousness of it, down to the exact circles and ditches, the male bulge and the cositus, was utterly groundbreaking. Now, historians still argue whether Dante's masterpiece was primarily a theological exposition, a scathing political critique of contemporary Florence and the papacy, or simply a profound work of art exploring the human condition. Perhaps it was all three, blended into a narrative so compelling that it cemented visual tropes of hell that persist to this day. Even if you've never read the Divine Comedy, you've likely seen images, heard phrases, or absorbed concepts that directly trace back to Dante's terrifyingly imaginative mind. Think of the distinct levels, the demons with pitchforks, the sheer despair etched onto the faces of the damned, all heavily influenced by his vision. One fascinating tidbit is how literally people took Dante's depictions. While it was a work of fiction, its widespread popularity and theological underpinning meant that for many, this was the layout of hell. It wasn't just a story, it became a mental map. Artists, inspired by his words, created terrifying frescoes and paintings that visually reinforced these brutal, eternal punishments. Imagine sitting in a church, looking up at a fresco of sinners boiling in pitch, or being devoured by monstrous beasts, and knowing, or at least believing, that this was a very real, very possible outcome for your immortal soul. It was a rather effective tool for encouraging piety, wouldn't you agree? Dante even gave us the concept of purgatory, a middle ground for those whose sins weren't mortal enough for eternal damnation, but still required purification. It was a place of hope, unlike the absolute despair of the inferno. But even there, the suffering was profound, though temporary. This entire framework, the meticulous layers of the afterlife, provided a sense of order and cosmic justice that was both terrifying and, in a strange way, reassuring to the medieval mind. It meant there was a divine accounting, a place for everything, and everything in its dreadful place. You were never quite sure where you stood with the Mesopotamian gods, but with Dante's God, the lines were drawn very clearly in fiery brimstone. Reformation divides, hell's nuances. See how the Protestant Reformation brought new theological interpretations to hell. You feel the biting chill of a German winter morning, the scent of wood smoke thick in the air, as you stand on the precipice of an intellectual earthquake. It's the early 16th century, and the spiritual landscape, once seemingly as solid and unchanging as the cobblestones beneath your worn boots, is about to fracture. The world you inhabit, a world where the Catholic Church has for centuries been the undisputed arbiter of salvation and damnation, is on the brink of revolution. Remember how Dante, in his medieval masterpiece, painted hell with such terrifying precision, giving shape to abstract theological concepts. Well, imagine if someone then decided to take a giant eraser to parts of that meticulously drawn inferno. That's precisely what's brewing. The printing press, that glorious engine of change, is humming, churning out pamphlets and treatises like a relentless theological meme factory. Suddenly, everyone's a theologian, armed with arguments sharper than any sword. You can almost hear the furious scratching of quills and the indignant shouts from pulpits as established doctrines are questioned, dissected, and in some cases, outright rejected. This isn't just a squabble over minor church policy. This is a fundamental reevaluation of how you, a mere mortal, might escape the very fires of hell. And trust me, you'd rather face a dragon than argue theology with a 16th century reformer. At least with the dragon, you probably won't survive to be proven eternally wrong. At the heart of this tumultuous period stands a figure named Martin Luther. He's not just nailing theses to church doors because he's out of thumbtacks. He's challenging the very foundation of the church's authority, especially concerning salvation, and by extension, the nature of the afterlife. For centuries, the Catholic Church had presented a complex roadmap to the divine, a journey often involving good works, sacraments, and, crucially, purgatory, that fiery, temporary pit of purification where souls could atone for sins not grave enough for hell, but too weighty for immediate entry into heaven. It was, in many ways, an ingenious system, complete with indulgences that could reduce your time, or even a loved one's time, in this cosmic waiting room, though purgatory definitely offered less terrible muzak than your average dentist's office. Luther, however, drops a bombshell. He champions justification by faith alone. If your salvation depends solely on God's grace, received through faith in Christ, then what's the point of purgatory? What's the point of buying indulgences? The very need for that intermediate, suffering realm begins to crumble under the weight of this new theological emphasis. It's a radical shift. If God's forgiveness is freely given, then the idea of a painful, protracted cleansing after death feels redundant. This isn't to say Luther completely erased the concept of an afterlife of punishment. Hell remained a very real and terrifying prospect for the unrepentant. But the path to avoiding it, and the very existence of a purgatorial detour, was radically redefined. Other prominent reformers, like John Calvin, intensified the conversation. Calvin, with his rigorous logic and emphasis on God's absolute sovereignty, developed the doctrine of predestination. This belief posited that God, from eternity, had already chosen who would be saved, the elect, and who would be damned. For those not chosen, hell wasn't a potential outcome. It was a preordained destiny. Imagine the psychological impact of that. You could live a seemingly righteous life, yet still be among the reprobate, irrevocably destined for eternal torment. It certainly put a lot of pressure on demonstrating signs of your election, lest your neighbors suspect you were already pre-booked for the fiery abyss. It made those Sunday sermons particularly gripping, wouldn't you say? This period saw a fascinating splintering of ideas about hell's specifics. While the core concept of eternal conscious torment for the wicked generally persisted among Protestants, the reason for it shifted. It was less about paying a temporal debt in purgatory and more about a direct, eternal consequence of God's just wrath against sin, chosen by divine decree or sealed by a lack of saving faith. Some early Anabaptist groups even toyed with ideas closer to annihilationism, the belief that the wicked would simply cease to exist rather than suffer eternally. But this remained a fringe view in the early Reformation. The mainstream historical fact here is undeniable. Martin Luther's challenge to the sale of indulgences fundamentally undermined the economic and theological necessity of purgatory for vast swathes of Europe. A quirky tidbit from this era is the sheer volume of artistic and literary output reflecting these changing views. While Catholic art continued to depict the horrors of purgatory, and the Last Judgment with gruesome detail. Protestant art often focused more on the glory of Christ's sacrifice and the direct relationship between the believer and God, subtly shifting the visual emphasis away from the tortures of the afterlife and towards the promise of grace. It was like a spiritual rebranding, where the focus moved from escape from hell to reception of heaven. Historians still argue whether the Protestant emphasis on individual sin and salvation made the personal experience of fear of hell more acute, or if it lessened the terror by offering a clearer, if narrower, path to grace. The Reformation didn't just divide kingdoms, it divided souls, offering new blueprints for their eternal destinations. The meticulous Inferno of Dante, once a universally understood map, now had alternative routes, some leading directly to damnation without the detour of purgatory, others offering a more immediate, if precarious, path to salvation. The theological debates weren't just academic exercises. They were urgent, existential questions played out in pamphlets, sermons, and ultimately in the hearts and minds of millions across Europe, each grappling with a subtly yet profoundly reimagined hell. Enlightenment queries, reasons doubt. You thought the Reformation stirred things up, splitting faiths and sparking theological debates faster than a TikTok trend spreads misinformation. Well, hold on to your powdered wigs, because if the Reformation was a theological rumble, the Enlightenment was a full-blown intellectual earthquake, and its tremors were about to shake the very foundations of hell itself. You're standing, metaphorically speaking, in a bustling Parisian salon, the air thick with the scent of coffee and radical ideas, the murmur of hushed, intense conversations washing over you. Outside, the world is still largely governed by tradition and dogma, but in these privileged pockets, reason is the new king, and it's demanding answers. You find yourself peering over the shoulders of great minds, their faces illuminated by flickering candlelight, as they pore over texts, not for divine revelation, but for logical consistency. They're asking the kinds of questions that would have landed you in a very hot spot just a century or two prior. Is eternal damnation truly compatible with a benevolent, all-powerful God? Does the threat of everlasting torment actually inspire virtue, or just hypocrisy and fear? It's almost like they're saying, look, we've been threatened with a cosmic timeout for millennia, but can we just, talk about it? This isn't about simply reinterpreting Scripture, as the Reformers did. This is about applying the cold, hard logic of science and philosophy to concepts previously considered sacrosanct. Think of it like this. After centuries of accepting that the earth was the center of the universe because, well, God said so, Galileo and Copernicus came along with telescopes and math, saying, actually about that. The Enlightenment thinkers are doing the same for the afterlife. They're putting hell under the microscope of reason. And honestly, if you'd spent a few centuries being told you were one bad thought away from eternal barbecue, you'd start asking questions too. You probably wouldn't survive this mental shift without a stiff drink. One mainstream historical fact you'll encounter here is the rise of deism. Imagine God as the ultimate clockmaker. He winds up the universe, sets its laws in motion, and then steps back, letting it run according to those natural principles. In this view, divine intervention, miracles, and yes, even fiery pits of eternal torment seem a little unnecessary. If the universe operates on rational laws, then human morality should be guided by reason and empathy, not by the terror of punishment. Why would a perfect clockmaker need to keep tweaking his creation with threats of eternal pain? It suggests a rather inefficient and, frankly, quite mean engineer. You hear names whispered with reverence, or sometimes with scandal. Voltaire, the biting wit who championed tolerance and famously quipped about crushing the infamous thing, meaning fanaticism and superstition. Diderot, the relentless editor of the Encyclopédie, which aimed to compile all human knowledge, implicitly challenging the Church's monopoly on truth. These were not necessarily atheists, many were deists, or at least deists-leaning. But they certainly were not fans of the medieval inferno we saw Dante meticulously map out. They looked at the endless suffering, the gnashing of teeth, the wails of the damned, and wondered, is this truly the work of divine love or something far more human, a tool forged by power and fear? The argument began to take shape. If God is infinitely good, as Christian doctrine professes, how could he condemn his creations to infinite suffering for finite sins? It was a logical knot, and the Enlightenment thinkers, with their passion for symmetry and reason, found it deeply unsatisfying. They began to question the very proportionality of hell. A momentary lapse, a single sin, leading to an eternity of torture. It felt less like divine justice and more like cosmic overreaction, like getting a life sentence for jaywalking. Then there's the quirky tidbit you might not expect. Some Enlightenment-era philosophers, driven by this same rational push, began to toy with the idea of universal salvation, or universalism. This was a fringe concept, certainly not mainstream, but it gained traction in some intellectual circles. If God is truly benevolent, the argument went, then surely, in the end, all souls would be reconciled with him. Why create beings only to condemn a vast majority to perdition? It felt counter to the very essence of divine goodness. Imagine trying to explain that to a medieval peasant who had been told since birth that only a select few would escape the fiery abyss. They'd probably think you'd spent too much time sniffing the philosopher's lamp oil. It was a radical notion, almost a theological equivalent of saying, actually, everyone gets a participation trophy in the afterlife. You're starting to see a subtle shift in the very concept of evil. Instead of an external, demonic force constantly tempting humanity, the Enlightenment began to view evil more as a product of ignorance, poor education, or flawed social structures. Fix those, they argued, and you fix the problems. No need for literal pitchforks or lakes of fire if you can simply enlighten people out of their bad habits. It's a very optimistic, almost naive view from our modern perspective, but it was profoundly revolutionary at the time. Yet, despite this intellectual onslaught, hell didn't vanish overnight. Oh no. For the vast majority, especially those outside the rarefied air of the salons and universities, the fear of hell remained a potent force. Churches still preached it, parents still warned their children about it, and the concept was deeply woven into the fabric of daily life. The challenge was intellectual, not yet societal. Historians still argue whether the Enlightenment truly diminished the fear of hell among the general populace, or simply provided intellectual tools for the elites to question it, leaving the common person's deeply ingrained anxieties largely untouched. It was a slow drip, not a sudden flood. You start to notice the language changing, too. Less about literal fire and brimstone, and more about spiritual consequences, internal damnation, or the absence of God. The physical tortures of Dante's Inferno began to feel, to some, almost vulgar, too medieval for the refined sensibilities of the Age of Reason. The concept of hell began to be sanitized, intellectualized, almost dephysicalized. It was still a bad place, yes, but perhaps less of a literal cosmic barbecue pit, and more of a really, really terrible time in your own head. The focus shifted from punitive external suffering to a more abstract psychological torment, the ultimate isolation, the consequence of choosing to live without virtue or reason. It's a bit like replacing a medieval torture chamber with a very long, very boring lecture on existential dread. The rationalists believed that human reason, rather than divine revelation or fear, was sufficient to guide moral conduct. If you understood the good, they argued, you would pursue it. This fundamentally undermined the traditional role of hell as a deterrent. Why threaten someone with eternal fire if they can simply reason their way to virtuous behavior? The entire scaffolding of fear that had supported so many religious structures for centuries began to look wobbly in the face of these new, bold inquiries. It was a seismic shift, one that would continue to reverberate for centuries, reshaping not just theology, but morality, law, and even the very idea of what it meant to be human. As the age of reason drew its logical lines across the theological landscape, questioning the very concept of a burning hell, you might expect the smoke to have cleared, leaving us with a nice, tidy, universally accepted answer. Ah, if only life and theology were that simple. Instead, the embers of doubt fanned into new flames of debate, sparking a fascinating, often contradictory, shift in how we envision damnation today. You walk into this modern theological arena, and it's less about fire and brimstone and more about nuanced arguments, academic papers, and, frankly, some very polite but very firm disagreements. It's enough to make you wish for the straightforward days of Mesopotamian dust, isn't it? You settle into your virtual armchair, perhaps with a warm drink, as we explore these contemporary currents. The rigid, unending torment that once dominated the Western imagination, solidified by figures like Augustine and terrifyingly illustrated by Dante, has, for many, begun to soften, even to dissolve. It's not that people suddenly stopped believing in consequences. Oh no, the human need for justice, for cause and effect, remains as strong as ever. It's simply that the nature of those consequences and the character of the divine dispenser of judgment started to come under intense scrutiny. One of the most significant shifts you'll encounter is the rise of universalism. Imagine, if you will, a vast, cosmic net that ultimately catches everyone. This view, gaining considerable traction in various Christian denominations and independent theological circles, posits that ultimately all humanity will be reconciled with God. The argument often stems from the boundless love and omnipotence of God. If God is truly all-loving and all-powerful, how could any of God's creations be eternally lost? It feels almost merciful, doesn't it? Like a cosmic group hug. Proponents argue that any suffering in the afterlife would be purgatorial, a purifying fire, not an eternal punishment. It's a temporary school of hard knocks, designed to refine and correct, rather than a permanent maximum security prison. You might even recall how the Buddhists saw their narakas, not as unending agony, but as painful, yet ultimately temporary karmic lessons. This isn't exactly the same, but you can feel the faint echoes of a similar sentiment. That suffering has a purpose beyond mere retribution. This idea isn't entirely new, of course. Some early church fathers, like Origen of Alexandria in the 3rd century, held universalist leanings, suggesting of apokatastasis, or restoration of all things. However, his views were eventually condemned as heresy. So, while it feels very modern to us now, there's a historical thread, albeit one that was largely suppressed for centuries. The difference now is its widespread, mainstream discussion, even acceptance. in a way it hasn't been for a very long time. Then, perhaps equally compelling, you find annihilationism, also known as conditional immortality. This is where things get a bit more definitive in a different way. Instead of eternal suffering or eventual salvation, the wicked simply cease to exist. They are utterly destroyed, snuffed out like a candle. The idea is that immortality isn't an inherent human trait, but a gift from God, conditional upon a relationship with Him. If you reject God, you reject the source of life itself, and thus you eventually perish. No eternal screams, no endless burning, just nothingness. It's a rather efficient solution, isn't it? A bit like having a delete button for spiritual miscreants. This view often appeals to those who struggle with the idea of a loving God condemning billions to eternal conscious torment, seeing it as disproportionate and unjust. Think about it. If the traditional view of hell involves constant, unending pain, the sheer mathematical horror of it becomes almost unbearable for modern sensibilities. Imagine living for 1 billion years in agony, then another billion, and another, with no end in sight. The concept stretches the human mind beyond its capacity for empathy. Annihilationism offers a way out of that existential horror, a merciful termination rather than an endless torture. You might even argue it's a cleaner break than an eternal cosmic reconciliation, depending on your preferred level of dramatic closure. Now, while these two views are gaining ground, the traditional doctrine of eternal conscious torment, echt, hasn't simply vanished. Far from it. Many conservative Christian denominations and theologians vigorously uphold the traditional view, arguing that it's clearly taught in Scripture and is necessary for divine justice. They emphasize the infinite nature of sin against an infinite God, thus warranting infinite punishment. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive the online comment section debate between these three camps if you were to wade in unprepared. It's a theological minefield, where even the most well-meaning discussions can devolve into passionate defenses of opposing views on divine justice, human free will, and the very nature of eternity. A quirky tidbit here is how some theologians, embracing the universalist or annihilationist positions, have had to reinterpret or contextualize some of the more graphic hellfire passages in the Bible. It's like trying to gently sand down a jagged rock until it's smooth and round enough to fit into a different-shaped hole. Some argue the language is metaphorical, symbolic of separation from God rather than literal fire. Others claim passages referring to eternal punishment actually mean punishment that has eternal consequences rather than eternal duration. It's an intricate dance of exegesis and interpretation. Historians and theologians still argue whether the growing acceptance of universalism and annihilationism represents a genuine theological evolution driven by deeper understanding of Scripture, or merely a capitulation to modern humanitarian sensibilities that find eternal torment unpalatable. Is it a return to overlooked ancient understandings, or simply a modern discomfort with traditional doctrines? The debate rages on in seminaries and pulpits around the world. So, as you can see, the picture of hell in the modern age isn't a fixed, terrifying tableau. It's a blurry, ever-shifting landscape, where the ultimate fate of souls is still very much a matter of fervent, often heartfelt debate. It's a testament to the human spirit's enduring need to grapple with big questions, even if those questions involve the potential for very, very uncomfortable afterlives. And it reminds you that the idea of hell, born from ancient fears and shaped by millennia of belief, is still very much a work in progress in the minds of many. So you've seen how the grand theological debates have ebbed and flowed, how academics and believers alike have wrestled with the very nature of damnation, some softening its edges, others dissolving it entirely. But even as the doctrinal specifics twist and turn, as the intellectual gears grind on the fate of the soul, there's a persistent, almost primal echo that remains unbroken. A visual and narrative language so deeply ingrained it transcends mere belief. We're talking about the raw, visceral imagery of hell, the kind that spills out of sacred texts and into the messy, glorious canvas of human creativity. It's like a particularly tenacious earworm, only instead of a catchy pop tune, it's the wails of the damned and the crackle of eternal flames. This isn't about what you believe anymore. It's about what you see and what stories you hear. Imagine for a moment you're standing in a quiet gallery, the hushed reverence of the space broken only by your own breath. Before you hangs a canvas, perhaps a triptych from the Dutch master Hieronymus Bosch. You don't need to be a theologian to gasp. On one panel, a vibrant, Edenic landscape, deceptively tranquil. But then your eyes drift inevitably to the other side, a nightmarish inferno. Limbs twist, creatures devour, strange instruments mete out bizarre torments. The sheer inventiveness of the suffering is almost admirable, in a deeply disturbing way. You see the musical instruments used not for harmony, but to torture. The giant ears with a knife between them, the Eggman, the ice skater. It's a sensory overload, a fever dream rendered in oil, and it pulls you in whether you want it to or not. This isn't just a religious warning. It's a terrifying work of art that taps into a universal human dread, a primal fear of chaos and pain. Artistic depictions of hell have always been a powerful tool, not just for instruction or warning, but for pure emotional impact. Think of the brooding, muscular figures in Michelangelo's Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel, the sheer weight of bodies being dragged down into the abyss. Or the medieval illuminated manuscripts, where grinning demons with bat wings gleefully poke the condemned with pitchforks, often with a mischievous glint in their eyes, as if this whole eternal punishment thing is just a bit of a laugh for them. These weren't just illustrations. They were visual sermons, designed to sear the consequences of sin directly onto the viewer's mind. It's a reminder that sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 screams, especially if those screams are coming from a giant, flaming pit. But if art painted the canvas, literature provided the detailed blueprints, the chilling narratives that cemented hell's topography in the collective imagination. And when we talk about literary hell, one name inevitably dominates the conversation: Dante Alighieri. His Inferno, the first part of the Divine Comedy, wasn't just a poem. It was an architectural marvel of damnation. You descend with Dante and his guide Virgil through 9 meticulously defined circles, each one a perfectly tailored torment for a specific sin. From the lustful swept by endless winds to the fraudulent stuck headfirst in fiery pits, Dante didn't just describe hell, he mapped it. This mainstream historical fact is crucial. Dante's vision of a structured, hierarchical hell, complete with specific punishments for specific transgressions, became so deeply ingrained in Western culture that for centuries, many people simply assumed that was the way hell was, regardless of what their local priest might actually preach. It was the original director's cut of damnation, and it stuck. His influence is so pervasive, you could say he practically invented the concept of the tourist trap in the afterlife, complete with souvenir tortures. And even centuries later, John Milton's Paradise Lost gave us a truly iconic Satan, not as a simplistic monster, but as a complex, charismatic, and utterly rebellious figure, holding court in Pandemonium, the capital of hell. Milton's hell is grand, desolate, and full of fallen angels debating their tragic fate, giving it a political and psychological depth previously unseen. It's less about simple suffering and more about the existential burden of eternal defiance, which frankly sounds exhausting. Now let's talk about the weird, wonderful, and sometimes alarming ways hell showed up in popular entertainment throughout history. You might not realize it, but the concept of the hell myth wasn't just a literary device. It was a common stage prop in medieval mystery plays. Imagine this: a giant, often monstrous, gaping maw, complete with painted fangs and maybe some smoke effects, from which actors playing demons would emerge and into which actors playing the damned would be physically dragged. It was the original special effect, a direct, theatrical representation of hell swallowing souls whole. It must have been quite the spectacle, certainly more engaging than watching someone explain scholastic theology. Historians still argue whether the consistent visual language of hell was primarily a top-down imposition by religious authorities, designed to keep the populace in line, or a more organic, bottom-up manifestation of collective human fears and anxieties that simply found a convenient outlet in religious narratives. Fast forward to the modern age, and hell's imagery has not only persisted, but exploded across every conceivable medium. In film, you've got everything from the philosophical exploration of the afterlife in What Dreams May Come, with its visually stunning, painterly hellscapes, to the pure, unadulterated body horror of the Hellraiser franchise, where Cenobites, these elegant sadomasochistic demons, promise experiences beyond pain and pleasure, which honestly sounds like something you probably won't survive. Even comedies like Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey take a crack at depicting hell as a bureaucratic nightmare, complete with Death himself, who turns out to be a pretty good sport. Video games, of course, have embraced hell with open arms or perhaps open maw. From the original Doom, where you're literally shooting your way through hordes of demons unleashed from hell, to the rich, mythological underworld of Hades, hell provides the ultimate setting for epic quests and endless combat. The sheer variety of demonic designs, the environmental storytelling of infernal landscapes, it's all testament to hell's enduring power as a creative wellspring. You'll find it creeping into music, too. From the blues musicians singing about crossroads deals with the devil, to the entire genre of heavy metal, which practically uses hell as its mascot, with album covers depicting everything from horned beasts to rivers of fire. It's a common visual language, an instant shorthand for extreme, dark, or rebellious themes. Even advertising, in its own peculiar way, sometimes dips a toe into hellish imagery, usually for dramatic effect, though I'm yet to see a truly effective campaign for hell's best insurance. We'll cover your eternal torment. Probably not going to catch on. But the point is, whether it's high art in a prestigious museum, a pulp horror novel, a blockbuster movie, or a video game with millions of players, the concepts and visuals associated with hell have become an indelible part of our shared cultural fabric. They adapt, they transform, they get reinterpreted, but they never truly disappear. They're a reminder that even if the theological waters calm, the imaginative fires of hell continue to burn brightly in the human mind, fueled by our deepest fears and wildest fantasies. Beyond deterrence, there's another powerful psychological driver: comfort for the suffering. Imagine yourself living in an ancient world, perhaps witnessing a famine or a plague sweeping through your village, or perhaps just the sheer, brutal unfairness of life, where the kindest souls sometimes meet the cruelest ends. Where do you find solace? Where do you reconcile this profound imbalance? The idea of a just afterlife, where those who endured hardship with virtue are finally rewarded, and those who caused suffering are finally punished, provides a vital psychological balm. It's the ultimate promise of cosmic balance, a celestial check and balance system that whispers, "It's okay, it will all make sense in the end." This eschatological promise, the idea of ultimate things and final judgments, offers a sense of hope and meaning in the face of what can feel like an arbitrary and often cruel existence. It gives suffering a potential purpose, transforming it from mere misfortune into a trial that, if navigated correctly, leads to eternal bliss, while the easy path of wickedness leads to unending regret. This isn't just about abstract philosophical comfort, mind you. It also taps into a very primal human need for narrative closure. Our brains are wired for stories, for cause and effect, for beginnings, middles, and satisfying ends. An unpunished villain or an unrewarded hero leaves us feeling incomplete. It's why you might find yourself fuming about a movie with a bad ending, or why gossip spreads so quickly when someone gets their comeuppance. Hell, in this context, serves as the ultimate narrative resolution, tying up all those loose ends where earthly justice failed. It's the final act in the grand human drama, ensuring that no bad deed truly goes unaddressed, and no good deed truly goes unacknowledged. Some anthropologists even suggest that the detailed descriptions of hell, particularly the more grotesque ones we saw in, say, Dante's Inferno, are a form of controlled catharsis, allowing people to process their anger and frustration at injustice in a safe, imaginative space. Think of it as a historical pressure release valve for societal resentments. But was this psychological need the primary force shaping the concept of hell, or merely a happy coincidence? Historians still argue whether the idea of hell evolved organically from universal human psychological needs for justice and order, or if it was primarily a theological construct introduced by religious leaders to exert social control. The truth, like most things in history, is probably a messy blend of both. You have the inherent human desire for things to be right, and then you have clever individuals who take that desire and craft it into a powerful framework for social cohesion and moral guidance. It's a bit like wondering if we invented the fork because we wanted to eat neatly, or if the fork came first and then we learned to eat neatly. Chicken and egg. Consider, for instance, the psychological impact on group cohesion. A shared belief in a terrifying afterlife for transgressors could profoundly strengthen the bonds within a community. If straying from the group's moral code means facing eternal torment, it creates a powerful incentive to conform, to cooperate, to uphold the values that bind everyone together. It's a kind of cosmic social contract, enforced not by earthly kings, but by divine judgment. And sometimes, you just need a really good boogeyman to keep everyone in line, right? Remember how the Norse had their chilling Niflheim, even if it wasn't strictly punitive. It still served as a dark, undesirable alternative, a place no one really wanted to end up, which inherently incentivized living a life that avoided such a fate. The fear of external punishment, even if it's for something as mundane as not contributing enough to the communal hunt, can be a surprisingly effective motivator for collective good. It ensures that everyone pulls their weight, lest they end up in a place that's even worse than doing dishes after a communal feast. Enduring echoes, hell's legacy. You stand now at the edge of it all, looking back across millennia. Imagine the air around you, thick with the collected sighs and whispers of every human who has ever pondered what comes next. You can almost feel the faint heat from Gehenna, the chill from Niflheim, and the dust from the Sumerian land of no return, all swirling into a singular, persistent hum. It's a sound that has resonated through every civilization, every faith, every quiet, fearful night. This concept, this grand, terrifying notion of hell, isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a living, breathing shadow that stretches across our collective consciousness, adapting, transforming, and relentlessly refusing to truly disappear. And honestly, you probably won't survive the thought of it all without a few shivers. It's quite the enduring myth, isn't it? Think about it. From the primordial fears of the earliest humans, giving shape to their post-mortem anxieties, to the intricate, bureaucratic torment outlined by Dante, this idea has proven remarkably adaptable. It shifted from the gloomy, undifferentiated pit of Sheol. Remember that shadowy sleep for all souls, to the fiery, specific punishments of the New Testament's Gehenna, and the meticulously detailed tortures of Islamic Jahannam. It's like a spiritual chameleon, changing its colors to match the theological landscape of each era, a true testament to its persistent power. You'd think by now, with all our modern science and endless streaming services, we'd have collectively decided it was just a really compelling bedtime story. But no, it just keeps reinventing itself, doesn't it? Perhaps it's because, deep down, we all carry that ancient craving for ultimate justice, that primal need for consequences to weigh on the cosmic scales. Indeed, throughout history, the concept of hell has served as a profoundly effective, if sometimes terrifying, moral compass. It's a mainstream historical fact that across numerous cultures and religions, the vivid promise of post-mortem retribution acted as a powerful deterrent against societal transgressions, ensuring adherence to moral codes. Medieval sermons, for instance, famously used the fear of eternal damnation to encourage piety and discourage everything from petty theft to theological dissent. It was quite the persuasive argument for church attendance, far more effective than a loyalty card. But beyond the broad strokes of societal control, you find these quirky, fringe tidbits. For instance, in some obscure apocryphal texts from early Christianity, there were whispers of a hell, specifically reserved for those who broke vows or oaths, where their tongues would be eternally scourged by demonic scorpions. A very specific kind of torment for a very specific kind of sin, almost like a highly specialized, very unpleasant niche market. It gives "watch your words" a whole new meaning, doesn't it? And even today, the evolution continues. We've seen modern theologians grapple with universalism, suggesting that perhaps hell isn't eternal for anyone, or annihilationism, where souls simply cease to exist. This persistent adaptation highlights that hell is not a static concept, but a dynamic reflection of human fears, hopes, and ethical frameworks. Historians still argue whether the evolving concept of hell was primarily a top-down imposition by religious authorities to control the populace, or if it was more a bottom-up reflection of communal anxieties and the innate human desire for justice to be served, even if it takes an eternity. Probably a bit of both, like most things. You can just imagine the committee meetings. More fire, less fire, what about lukewarm water? Too ambiguous. As we discussed earlier, that underlying psychological need for justice, that urge to see good rewarded and evil punished, resonates deeply. It's not just about fire and brimstone anymore. For many, it's about a spiritual reckoning, a separation from divine light, or even the profound self-inflicted torment of regret. Hell's imagery, its very architecture of suffering, has woven itself into our art, our literature, our very language. Hell on earth. Hellbent. What the hell? It's omnipresent, a testament to its enduring grip on our imaginations, proving that a truly dramatic narrative never really goes out of style. And now, as the shadows lengthen and the night deepens, you can feel the echoes of all these stories beginning to soften, to recede. The fiery imagery and the chilling cold start to gently dissipate, like mist after a long, intense dream, or the lingering scent of a distant campfire. All those intricate debates, the vivid depictions, the ancient fears, the profound questions that have shaped human understanding for millennia, they begin to settle into a quiet stillness, like dust motes finally coming to rest in the tranquil air after a busy day. The journey through these profound concepts, these human efforts to grasp the ungraspable, can sometimes feel overwhelming, leaving a faint imprint on your awareness. But remember, the very act of pondering these deep questions, of seeking to understand the contours of human belief, is a testament to the curious, hopeful, and resilient spirit within us all. There's no need to carry the weight of these ancient anxieties or the echoes of distant torments into your quiet moments of rest. Let the images fade, the sounds diminish, and the grand questions drift away on a gentle breeze, like leaves carried downstream by a quiet river. You've explored the vast landscape of human thought, traversed the realms of fear and hope, and now it's time for peaceful repose, a gentle settling into the present moment. The echoes of history will wait patiently for another time, another awakening. For now, simply allow yourself to sink into the comforting stillness that surrounds you, knowing that the journey is complete and a quiet peace awaits, enveloping you completely. Release the day, release the thoughts, and simply be. Sweet dreams.